It is said that every desert keeps one story closer than the rest. A single tale it lies beside at night, the way a sleeping child curls around a cherished shape. In this forgotten corner of sand and starlight, that story begins in the hush before dawn, when the sky is still deciding what it will become. The horizon is a low, dark line, barely more than a suggestion where earth and sky agree to meet. Above it hangs a single star, pale and persistent, refusing to join its companions in their slow retreat. The sand still holds the cool breath of the night, and the air smells faintly of stone and distant water that no longer runs. Whispers tell us that this star has lingered here for centuries, that on certain nights, when the moon is thin and the wind moves as gently as a sigh, it appears in the same place, hovering just above the lip of the world, as though waiting for someone who is late, or who will never come. Beneath this star, half buried in dunes and memory, lies an ancient platform of stone. At first it appears as nothing more than an interruption in the sand's endless script. A broken line here, a straight edge there, a hint of geometry in a landscape made of curves. But as the light slowly lifts, the shape reveals itself, broad and low, its corners aligned with a precision that disregards the wandering hands of time. This, it is said, was once the place where pharaohs came without their entourage, without their crowns, without the heavy embroidery of power. They came barefoot, in simple linen, climbing quiet steps carved into the rock, trusting that their authority did not begin on the throne, but under the sky. We move toward it now, our steps leaving soft scars on the sand. The world is unusually still. There is no sound of birds, no murmur of distant settlements, only wind, and even that as a faint, thoughtful breath. Beneath the silence, the stone seems to listen. The platform's edge, worn steps rise, their centers hollowed by centuries of bare feet. The corners are marked with the chipped pillars, each once capped with gleaming metal that caught and cradled starlight. That metal is gone now, taken by looters or melted by sun and war. But the bases remain, square, patient, dust-scarred. On the surface of the platform, faint carvings appear as the sky brightens. Spirals, stars, and small, careful lines that resemble rivers drawn in miniature. They run not across the land, but across the sky. This is not a map of Earth. It is a map of heaven. Some believe this place was not an altar, but an ear, a listening stone laid against the breast of the cosmos, meant to catch the slow heartbeat of the night. The star above us flickers, almost imperceptibly. It sits where the horizon bruises into violet, as if perched on an invisible ledge. For a moment, it seems to bend, dipping just enough to give the illusion of a bow, a small courtesy in a sky that rarely kneels. In the old stories, this star has a name that has been lost, not written, not preserved on papyrus or stone, only carried across generations by lips and breath, and then somewhere dropped. The kingdom that watched it called it not a watcher, but a companion, a guide, a herald of unspeakable messages. On the far side of the platform, partially swallowed by drifting sand, a low wall bears inscriptions. The hieroglyphs here are different from the ones that describe grain or taxation, victory or lineage. They turn their faces upward, their forms full of eyes and rays and flowing curves. We brush away the sand with slow hands. A figure of a king stands, arms lowered, empty, no scepter, no crook. Above his head is not the sun disk we know, but a ring of 7 stars and one slightly apart, marked by a spiral. His gaze is tilted upward, not to a god depicted in animal form, but to a bare patch of sky. Beside him, the text does not boast. It does not list battles or conquests. Instead, it speaks of listening. He stood beneath the breathing lights, the stone suggests, and let his heart grow quiet. He asked no question, and yet he was answered. There is something almost oceanic, say, in these lines, as though the sky is a sea and the stars are waves, rolling in with secrets from distant shores. There is humility here, too, unusual in a culture of monuments. A sense that even the highest crown is small beneath the slow turning of the constellations. Myths from this place say their rulers learned to step into a different sort of silence. Not the absence of sound, but a chamber within the self, where noise unknots and falls away. They would stand upon this very stone and wait for the star's light to pulse, not visibly, but in some deeper rhythm. In those intervals, between one invisible pulse and the next, they believed the heavens spoke. Some nights, it is said the Pharaoh would sway, as if rocked by an unseen tide. Attendants kept their distance, their torches banked low, watching as their king seemed to listen with his whole body. There are whispers of words spoken back, not to the star but through it, names of unborn heirs, decisions not yet needed, warnings of floods and famines that had not yet approached the banks of the Nile. And yet none of this was written down. Not the dates of these vigils, not the phrases, if there were phrases, not the exact location in the sky where that bowing star appeared. Where memory fades, only the stone remembers. We walk to the center of the platform. Here, a shallow depression has been carved, no wider than a human step. Its surface is polished smooth, gleaming faintly in the rising light, as though it once held water or oil, or perhaps nothing at all, only the weight of a bare foot, night after night. Standing there now, the horizon spreads in every direction. The desert lies like a sleeping animal, its dunes the slow rise and fall of breath. Above, the sky is no longer black, but a deep velvety blue, softening along the edges as dawn approaches. The star still hangs, refusing to yield, a single pearl pinned to the fabric of morning. It is said that on the most sacred nights, when certain stars returned to specific positions, the pharaoh removed even his amulets and stood here with open hands. No offerings, no incense, only breath, and a heart slowing to match the hidden rhythm of light. Perhaps he closed his eyes. Perhaps he whispered a name, a secret name, the kind that, once spoken aloud, binds the one who hears it to the one who utters it. Perhaps he said nothing at all. Beneath the silence, we feel the old ritual stirring, like dust caught in a shaft of sunlight. It is only memory, and yet it has a weight. On another section of the wall, almost erased by time, a different kind of scene appears. A line of figures kneels in a row, heads bowed not toward an altar, but toward a single star carved above them. The star is unusually large, its points elongated, its center marked with a tiny spiral. We trace the spiral with a fingertip and feel the slight roughness of the chisel's path. This is the star that bows, murmurs the inscription in its own slow language, the one that inclines its light when the earth remembers to listen. It is difficult not to feel that the star above us is aware, in some remote, impersonal way. Not of us, perhaps. We are too late, too far from the thread of the old ritual, but of the stone. of the platform, of the fracture line that runs from the altar's edge to the first step, like a crack in a vessel that has long held more than it was designed to contain. The sky brightens. The other stars have long since vanished into the vast blue. But this one remains, a pale ember resisting the tide of dawn. It trembles, or seems to, the way a candle does when it has burned almost to the end of its wick. Scholars, in their own careful tongue, might call this refraction, or some quirk of dust-laden air. But the old stories do not speak in that vocabulary. They tell instead of a star that chose to remain until the king arrived, a star that would not abandon its post even when the sky itself insisted on change. Some versions of the tale say that the last king of this line died far from this place, in a foreign campaign, beneath a different sky. That on the morning of his death, the star lingered here regardless, bowing above the empty platform, waiting for footsteps that never came. Others say that even a star can grieve, though its grief is not like ours. That its refusal to fade was a kind of mourning, a cosmic pause, a hesitation in the endless turning of spheres, honoring a bond that had been forged in the breath and silence and nameless listening. We do not know. We will never know. What we have are stones and carvings, and the feeling of something unfinished whenever we raise our eyes and see a stubborn point of light clinging to the edge of morning. The sky grows paler. The first hint of gold touches the highest dunes. The platform's carvings shrink into themselves as the shadows shorten. The air warms, and the cool breath of night that clung to the sand is drawn back into the day. Above the horizon, the star fades. It does not fall, does not flare. It simply diminishes, like a thought gently set aside. For a heartbeat, it is there and not there, present only as an after-image on the inner surface of the eye. Then even that is gone. The sky is bright now. Ordinary birds begin their ordinary journey. Somewhere far beyond our sight, people wake to the familiar weight of another day, unaware that the last trace of an old conversation has just dissolved into light. We remain on the stone a while longer. The platform is only a platform again. Sand creeps inquisitively over its edges. The carvings wait in their shallow grooves. The depression at the center holds nothing but dust and the shape of what might have been a footstep, or might have been the wind. Perhaps the messages were never meant to be written. Perhaps they only ever existed in the space between a heartbeat and the next, in the long, slow breaths of a listening king, in the wordless comfort of being noticed by something vast. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen, and some do not echo at all. They pass through us like starlight through clear water, leaving no mark but a quiet ache, a sense that for a moment we were part of a conversation we will never fully remember, and yet will always miss. As the sun rises, the desert brightens and hardens. The magic of the hour thins. The story, for now, returns to the patience of stone and sand. But somewhere, beyond the clarity of day, in a place where time moves more slowly than dust, a star remembers the shape of a desert crown and the feel of a barefooted figure standing very still, saying nothing at all. It is said that some nights do not end when the sun rises. They slip away from the sky, yes, but they do not dissolve. They fold themselves carefully, like a robe after ceremony, and are carried somewhere the wind cannot touch. In forgotten corridors beneath a crumbled temple, there lies such a place. The temple above is little more than broken columns and tired stone. Sand has written its own scripture across the floor, and the sun moves through gaps in the roof like a weary priest repeating an old prayer. Where memory fades, only the foundations still remember the weight of footsteps, the murmur of offerings, the cool touch of water poured in careful circles. But beneath this ruin, under the dust and the crushed petals of centuries, stairways descend. The air grows cooler with each step, as though the heat of the desert has been politely asked to wait above. Torches once burned here. You can see their ghosts, soft shadows licking at the ceiling, soot stains like fingerprints left by flame. At the end of one such corridor, the stone tightens. The walls move closer, shouldering us inward, guiding us toward a door that is not a door but an opening cut from the rock with such precision that the darkness beyond looks almost solid. Here, we pause. The air is very still. No wind has ever touched this threshold. The silence has a thickness to it, like soft cloth layered upon soft cloth. It is said that the first pharaoh to enter this place did so with covered eyes, led by the hand of a priest who had spent 40 nights in preparation. We step forward in his echo, not with his rank, but with his hesitation. Inside, the darkness has weight. It does not fall upon us like a blow, nor swallow us as a mouth might. It lies, calm and unmoving, filling the chamber like deep water fills a still pool. Beneath the silence, we can almost hear its slow, patient breathing. Our eyes adjust by degrees. The outlines of the room drift into being. 4 walls, a low ceiling, the suggestion of carved pillars fading into the gloom. At the heart of the chamber stands a blackened urn, wide at the shoulders and narrowed at the base, like a night sky poured into a vessel. Its surface is scorched, as though it once stood too close to a fire that never gave off heat. Fine cracks feather its sides. Around its neck, a band of pale stone glimmers faintly, carved with spirals and star marks, with the tiny worn shapes of moons and eyes and feathers. This urn, the old texts whisper, contains a night that never properly ended. The pharaohs believed that darkness too could teach. They knew that the sun tells one kind of story, bright and proud, full of kings and monuments and victories. But the night tell another, softer, more uncertain, braided with dreams and fears and the fragile glow of distant suns. Some believe that one night, long ago, the sky changed in a way no one could ignore. A particular pattern of stars, small, unremarkable perhaps to us, twisted, shifted, slid into a new alignment. No empire fell. No river reversed its course. No mountain split open to acknowledge it. And yet the priests felt it like a hand on the back of the neck. A change beneath all other changes, the way the sea might feel the moon shift its gaze. That night, they say, was gathered. Not stolen, not broken, but invited to stay. The chamber around us bears the traces of that invitation. On the walls, constellations are etched, but not in the familiar forms we know. No hunters, no ships, no lions. Instead, the stars are arranged in tangled spirals, folded over themselves like threads in a woven cloth. Some lines double back in impossible ways, as though the sky were being viewed through the mirror of someone else's dream. We move closer to the nearest wall. Under our fingertips, the stone is cool and slightly rough. The carved stars are small depressions, each one once filled with something that caught the light, gold, perhaps, or crushed shell, or polished stone. Now they are empty. But when we draw back and look at them from a distance, they seem to glimmer, not with reflected light, but with the memory of it. Beneath one cluster of stars, a line of hieroglyphs curves along the wall like a low tide. We read slowly, the way one might listen to an old song. The sky bent. The river of light took another course. We kept the night so we might learn its new direction. At the heart of the chamber the urn waits. Its cracked lid sits slightly askew, as if something beneath it once pushed upward, then settled again. Around its base, dust forms a soft ring, untouched by footprints. No one has dared step closer in a very long time. And yet, as we watch, flickers of something like starlight seem to breathe from the thin opening where lid and lip do not quite meet. It is not a bright light, not enough to illuminate the room. It comes and goes, brief and tender, like the glow at the edge of a firefly's wing or the last glimmer in a cooling ember. Each pulse feels unhurried, almost shy. Between those pulses, there is a rhythm, a slow, oceanic echo that seems to rise up from the stone itself, pass through our bones, and sink back down. In some forgotten century, this room was filled with voices. We can feel them, like warmth left behind where a body once sat. Priests, chanting in low tones, following the pulse of that unseen glow. A language beyond words, more breath than speech. The echo of those chants lingers here still, but their cadence is too slow for waking minds. It nudges at the edge of perception, inviting us to release our grip on time and drift into something wider. It is said the Pharaohs came here when the world felt unsure. Not for omens of war or harvest, but for subtler questions. The kind that only arise when the night feels slightly off. When the familiar constellations look back with eyes that do not quite match the ones we remember. They would sit in a curve along the wall, backs to the cold stone, faces turned toward the urn. The chamber would be sealed. No torches, no lamps. Only the dark and the faint breathing of captured starlight. In that court night, they listened. The carved constellations on the walls are twisted not out of error, but out of intention. As we walk their patterns with our eyes, a strange truth begins to emerge. This room was not meant to hide darkness. It was meant to preserve a specific night, like a pressed flower between the pages of a sacred book. A night when the stars shifted, changed partners, stepped out of their long-practiced dance. No one could say whether that change was a warning or a blessing. Some priests believed the realignment spoke of thresholds to come, lines in time that would later be crossed by those who had never heard of this temple or its secret. Others claimed it was only a sigh of the cosmos, a small adjustment of a burden carried for too long. The Pharaohs did not agree. The council did not agree. The scribes recorded their arguments in careful curling lines. Outside this chamber, no ink was permitted to follow where the night itself was kept. There is a tenderness in that prohibition. Perhaps they felt that whatever the stars whispered that night was too delicate to be fixed to stone. Like breath frost on a mirror, it would lose its shape the moment it was touched. So they preserved not the words, but the moment. They carved the sky as it appeared that one night, here on these walls, in shapes that make sense only if you have spent a lifetime watching the heavens. They sealed the chamber with care. They placed an urn at its center, not to trap a monster, not to hold a curse, but to cradle the texture of that strange darkness, the way it moved, the way it felt, the way it seemed to listen back. We approach the urn as close as we dare. The blackened surface is not entirely opaque. Here and there, beneath the soot-like patina, faint traces of original color show through. A thread of deep blue, a tiny fleck of gold, a line of white spiraling around the curve like a coiled breath. The cracked lid bears a single symbol at its center, a spiral within a circle, ringed by the tiny star marks. At the spiral's heart, someone long ago pressed a fingertip into the damp clay. The print has hardened into eternity, a small sign that a human hand once dared to touch what was meant to hold the sky. We do not touch it. Instead, we watch as another faint pulse of light escapes through the crack, rises a finger's breadth above the lid, and then folds back into invisibility. It leaves behind a sensation more than a vision, the feeling that the room has exhaled and now waits for us to do the same. Beneath the silence, something still listens. We turn back to the walls. Between the carved constellations, smaller figures appear, so worn they almost disappear into the stone. These are not gods or kings. They are simple shapes. Hands, eyes, pairs of feet drawn close together, as if standing without moving. One inscription, barely legible, reads, "We keep the night so that it may keep us." It is a strange reversal. We think of ourselves as the keepers of records, of stories, of relics. But here the roles blur. Perhaps this night, stored gently within these stones, has been holding the souls of those who entrusted it with their fear, their curiosity, their hope. As the moments stretch, the darkness around us changes. It is still absolute in places, still deep and weighty. But it no longer feels like emptiness. It feels inhabited, not by shapes or shadows, but by a presence that is neither kind nor cruel, neither old nor young, simply vast and attentive. Time softens in such places. We cannot say how long we have stood here, tracing star lines, watching the breathlight rise and fall from the urn's cracked lid. The mind loosens its hold on before and after. There is only this suspended hour, this stored night, this echo of a sky that once rearranged itself and asked to be remembered. At last, the air begins to cool. It is not a sudden shift, more like the slow drawing of a veil. The flickers from the urn grow weaker, each one rising a little less, lasting a little shorter. The carved stars pale. The distant chant, that soft, almost sound at the edge of hearing, thins into a whisper and then into nothing at all. We feel, without knowing how, that the night is settling back into itself. Not escaping, there is no rush, no tumbling release. Simply curling down, like a cat gathering its limbs beneath it, or a wave folding back into the sea. The chamber grows still. Dust hangs motionless in the air, suspended in the last of the unseen glow. The urn stands as it did before we came, cracks and all, patient, opaque. The walls are only stone again. The constellations, still twisted, now look like ordinary carvings, robbed of their earlier shimmer. It is said some mysteries are safeguarded not to frighten us, but to protect something fragile. Not a secret, perhaps, but a state of being. A delicate balance between knowing and not knowing. Between fear and awe, between the urge to control and the willingness to stand in the dark and simply listen. Here, in the chamber where the night was stored, we understand this in a wordless way. No revelation has been granted. No prophecy laid out like a scroll for us to read. The stars have not rearranged themselves for our benefit. The urn remains closed. And yet, something has shifted, quietly, in us. Perhaps it is only this, the sense that darkness can hold more than absence, that within it, certain things are able to survive that would crumble under the bright weight of daylight explanations. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some nights only reveal themselves after they are gone. And some truths choose to live in a sealed room beneath a ruined temple, breathing softly through a crack in a blackened urn, waiting not to be discovered, but to be honored. When we finally turn to leave, the silence does not follow us. It remains, settled like dust, like memory, like a night that never properly ended, still cradled where the wind may never reach, still listening beneath the stone. It is said that in a desert valley where the cliffs rise like the sides of an enormous stone bowl, there is a single face carved high above the sand. Time has softened its edges, chipped its crown, and filled its eyes with dust. And yet the expression remains clear. A tender expectancy, as if the stone itself is waiting for an answer that has not yet arrived. At dawn, the carving is pale and quiet. At noon, it glares beneath the sun. But at night, beneath the slow river of the sky, the face seems most alive. Its gaze is turned upward, not toward the horizon where caravans pass like faint thoughts, but toward the deep dark above, where one star moves a little differently than the rest. This lonely effigy marks the beginning of our story. In forgotten corners of ancient scrolls, half consumed by damp and insects, the legend is written in soft, careful lines. It speaks of a pharaoh who believed that one particular star was not fixed but alive, wandering across the heavens in a long, patient pilgrimage. He believed that one day, far beyond a single lifetime, that star would arrive at a destined place in the sky, directly above where his tomb would lie sealed beneath the sand. "Let my heart be found where its light pauses," he is said to have whispered, when the temple lamps were low. Not when it rises, not when it sets, but when it stands. Whispers tell us that he was not the first to notice the star's strange behavior. For generations, quiet astronomer priests had watched it from the temple roofs and from the cool courtyards, marking its position on stone and papyrus with little star-shaped cuts and faint red ink. It did not dance wildly, did not streak across the sky like a burning messenger. Its journey was nearly invisible, a slow drifting over many years, as if the star were walking, not leaping, across the firmament. Beneath the silence of those clear desert nights, they saw it, a tiny disobedience in the grand pattern. Where memory fades, numbers remain. In the archives, they kept their tallies, angles measured from the horizon, distances from known constellations, sequences of nights marked with the smell of lamp smoke and worn fingers. Some saw in its movement the promise of rebirth, a celestial repetition that would return the kingdom to some earlier purity. Others feared it meant judgment, that when the star reached its unseen destination, a gate would open in the dark and the world would have to answer for the dust it had turned holy and the blood it had made ordinary. The pharaoh listened to them all. He listened to the priest who said the star was a herald of forgotten wisdom, returning like a long-lost sigh to remind them who they had been before the stone hardened and the crowns grew heavy. He listened to the one who said it was nothing at all, an illusion, a trick of the eyes, a reflection from some ocean too distant to matter. He listened, and then, as rulers sometimes do when the voices are too many and the answers too few, he turned inward. It is said that on a moonless night, when the city lay wrapped in thick, sweet sleep. He climbed alone to the highest terrace of his palace. Below him, the rooms where decisions were made and oaths were sworn were dark and still. Above him, the sky widened like a great silent chamber. There he found the star. It was not the brightest, not the largest. It did not flash or burn. It simply shone, steady and small, a single point of patient light moving along its invisible path. The pharaoh watched it for so long that his sense of time unraveled. The cold of the night crept into his bones. He could hear his own breath slowing, soft as sand sliding down a dune. In that stretched out hour, he made a vow, not to gods or to men, but to the sky itself. He would follow the star. Not with his feet, of course. No man could span such distances. He would follow it with stones and alignments, with corridors and courtyards and upright pillars, placed like markers along a road only the heavens could see. He would build observatories along its projected path, each one a step in a stairway that rose not upward, but outward into time. And when the star's long wandering finally brought it to the position he had seen in his mind, a point in the sky only he seemed to recognize as important, his tomb would lie beneath that invisible crossing, like a bowl waiting to catch a last drop of light. So the work began. The first observatory was raised within the capital, its roof open to the sky, its walls inscribed with spirals and star marks. Astronomer priests stood within its open circle at night, their white garments glimmering faintly as they traced the star's progress with outstretched hands. They were given no task more urgent than watching. Farther out, along the spine of the desert, other stations were built. Some were little more than stone platforms aligned with extreme care, their corners pointing toward certain stars, their sight lines anchored on the wandering light. Others were more elaborate. Small temples with central courts and narrow doorways that framed slivers of the sky like sacred scrolls. Each of these places was marked with the same symbol, a single star enclosed within a spiral, encircled by a ring. Marked by the moon at certain hours, this sign glowed faintly on the walls like a low ember. We follow this path now in memory. We imagine the long line of observatories stretching across dunes and cliffs, some now buried, some broken, all whispering the same question into the vast, oceanic dark. Where are you going? At each site, inscriptions tell the same story in different voices. One wall speaks of rebirth, a seed image carved beside the star, rays turned inward like roots. Another speaks of judgment, a feather and a heart balanced beneath the star's gaze. A third shows an open eye within a gate, as if the star itself were coming to look through a door that only the dead could pass. Decades slid past like sand through a narrow throat. Each year, during a certain season, the pharaoh would travel from one observatory to the next, escorted by a small retinue, but often walking alone across the final stretch of stone. He grew older. His back bent, his steps slowed, but his eyes did not lose their hunger for that tiny light. Beneath the silence, the kingdom watched too. Children were told to look up at dusk and find the moving star, the one that refused to keep still like the rest. Lovers whispered promises beneath it, believing it carried their vows along with it as it traveled. Farmers glanced at it from their fields, unsure whether to fear or trust it. The star brightened over the years, or perhaps their eyes sharpened to it. Hope and fear mingled like two currents in the same river. Some whispered that when the star reached its destination, The dead would rise from their stone chambers, not in flesh, but in remembrance. That forgotten names would be spoken again, and old injustices would be balanced, not by punishment, but by a clear seeing. Others whispered of the opposite, that when it arrived, the sky would close like an eyelid, and humanity would be left beneath a blank, indifferent firmament. The Pharaoh heard these stories too. He let them flow around him like water. In his later years, he spent long nights in an especially remote observatory, one carved into the side of the very cliff where his stone likeness would eventually be cut. This chamber opened onto the sky through a narrow slit, framing only a small patch of the heavens, the one place where, he believed, the star would one day pause. He would lie on a low couch of stone, wrapped in simple cloth, while the priest tracked the star's slow approach, marking its evolving angle in faint red ink upon the walls. The chamber smelled of cool dust and lamp smoke and human breath. In that little echo of eternity, the Pharaoh's thoughts grew very quiet. He did not ask the star for riches or victory. He did not beg for a longer reign. If the old texts speak true, he asked only one thing: that when the star finally arrived, it would find him. Not the name carved on his sarcophagus, not the mask laid upon his face. Him, the breath that had once watched it from a palace terrace, the heart that had once felt the night unspool into something vast and tender. But time, as it often does, moved with its own rhythm. The star kept coming, patient and unchanged. The observatories marked its journey like beads on a thread. The kingdom grew used to its presence, the way one grows used to the slow swelling of the Nile, or the steady drift of sand against a wall. And then, one morning, beneath a sky as ordinary as any other, the Pharaoh died. He was placed in his tomb with all the ceremony his station required. Wrapped, adorned, sealed away beneath carefully inscribed stone. His resting place was indeed aligned, as he had decreed, with that portion of the sky the priests had calculated would one day hold the wandering star. But that day had not yet come. The people mourned, as people do. Some said the star had failed him. Others said it was he who had rushed ahead, unwilling to wait for the end of its pilgrimage. The astronomer priests continued their calculations, their nightly vigils, but something had changed in the music of their work. The urgency dulled. New rulers brought new concerns. The kingdom's gaze sank gradually from the sky to the immediate dust at its feet. Where memory fades, the stones remained. The observatories lingered, wind carving new stories into their surfaces. The star continued its long, quiet journey, as indifferent or as devoted as it had always been. Generations came and went under its light, unaware that they were walking beneath a question that had never been answered. Years turned to decades, decades to centuries. The carving softened, the ink vanished. The language in which the story had been written drifted towards silence. And then, long after the Pharaoh who waited had crumbled to powder within his sealed chamber, the star reached the place in the sky he had seen in his mind's inner darkness. We return, in imagination, to the cliff where his stone image still watches. It is night. The desert is an ocean of shadow, its dunes like slow frozen waves. The air is cool and smells faintly of nothing at all. Above, the sky stretches immense and utterly still, every star a quiet flame. There, directly above the cliff, Above the carved face with its tender expectancy, the wandering star has finally come to rest. It sits motionless, a single point of light, pinned to the exact crossing of invisible lines the old astronomer priests once drew in their careful, wavering hands. No trumpets announce it. No doors in the sky swing open. The sand does not tremble. There is only the star and the cliff and the long, soft breath of the desert. Beneath the silence, it feels as though the star is waiting. Waiting, perhaps, for a king with bare feet and a tired heart. Waiting for the sound of his slow steps ascending the last stair. Waiting for a voice that once whispered up to it in the language of longing, which is older than any kingdom. But there is no one there. Only the stone face, half erased. Only the observatories, half buried. Only the story, carried now not in scrolls or temple songs, but in the thin echo that lingers when we look up and feel, for reasons we cannot name, that something vast has just arrived, and we are late to greet it. Perhaps it was never meant to be found, this perfect alignment between a moving star and a waiting tomb. Perhaps its purpose was not to fulfill a promise, but to show us the shape of yearning itself. How a single light can draw a whole life into its orbit. How a heart can spend its days walking slowly towards something it will never quite touch, and some voices only echo or battle when we are ready to listen. Some stars only bow once. In a sky no one is watching. Tonight, above the sleeping desert, the star rests at its long-chosen station. Still, gentle, and without explanation. And somewhere beneath it, and in chambers of stone and sand and memory, the pharaoh who waited lies in his endless night, unaware that the companion he trusted with his most secret hope has finally come, and is still there, shining softly in the dark. It is said that some temples were not built to worship gods, but to listen to the sky. In forgotten corners of the desert, where dunes drift like pale waves, and the wind speaks in long, unbroken murmurs. Sand has claimed nearly every wall and doorway once shaped by human hands. Yet beneath one of these dunes, beneath a soft, rippling hill whose shadows lengthen each evening like a cloak being drawn across the land, there lies a hall the desert has not fully silenced. It begins with a half-buried arch, only the topmost curve is visible above the sand. Worn smooth by centuries of wind, the rest has been swallowed, but the night air leaking through the narrow seam carries a coolness that does not belong to the open desert. If one listens closely, even from above, one can hear a faint whisper, not the hiss of shifting grains, but the memory of breath. We descend through the collapsed entrance, brushing sand aside with soft, careful steps. A pale river of moonlight pours in from the world above, illuminating a staircase carved with feathered lines. Delicate grooves shaped like currents of air turned suddenly to stone. At the staircase's base, the darkness opens like a held breath finally exhaled. This is the library of celestial breath. The hall stretches out before us, a long sanctuary supported by pillars carved with the soft, swirling patterns of skywind. These carvings twist and overlap, spiraling upward like smoke rising in prayer. Their lines are so fluid, so tenderly made, that they seem less carved and more grown, like wind frozen mid-motion. Whispers tell us that long ago, priests stood between these pillars at dusk and dawn, listening to the heavens the way one might listen to a sleeping child. They believed the stars did not merely shine, but breathed, exhaling faint rhythms across the ages, pulses so subtle that only the most attentive hearts could feel them. We step into the moonlit corridor, our footfalls muffled by centuries of dust. The moonlight slips through narrow slits high in the ceiling, falling in thin, shimmering paths across the floor. Each beam carries drifting particles that dance like miniature constellations, fragments of worlds that crumble and reform in the smallest gestures of air. Tablets lie scattered along the hall, half buried beneath dunes of pale sand that have traveled invisibly through cracks in the stone. Their edges peek out like forgotten pages. We kneel beside one, brush away the fine dust, and reveal the script beneath. The lines on the tablet do not behave like ordinary writing. They drift between forms, some resembling the arcs of planetary paths, others curling like poetry, still others floating into abstract spirals that seem to mirror the patterns carved into the pillars around us. The symbols appear shaped as much by breath as by chisel, as though the carver traced the delicate architecture of a single exhale. It is said these inscriptions capture the breath of the heavens, not the great movements of comets or the loud proclamations of eclipses, but the tiniest tremors, a faint dimming, a slight hesitation in a star's glow, the slow shift of light that happens so gradually it could be mistaken for a trick of the eye. The priests of this place believed these subtleties carried messages, not for individuals, not for lone rulers or wandering scholars, but for the unfolding of eras. Where memory fades, breath remains. We move deeper into the hall. The corridor bends, and the moonlight stretches along new angles, illuminating walls carved with long horizontal waves. These resemble wind lines or rivers or music stripped of its sound. The air here feels denser, yet softer, as if it has been resting for centuries, waiting to be stirred awake. Some believe the pharaohs came here not to speak, but to be unspoken, to unlearn the loudness of the world, to inhale the slow rhythm of the cosmos and remember that they were small but beloved, parts of a much larger song. We imagine them sitting cross-legged on the cool stone floor, bare-chested, linen panels pooling at their feet. Their hands rest gently on their knees, palms up, as they breathe in unison with the priests around them. Together, they listen, not for words, not for signs, for breath, for the soft inhales and exhales of the night sky, the quiet contraction and expansion of a universe that is always in the process of remembering itself. To these priests, silence was not absence, it was a full presence. They recorded not the content of messages, but their sensation, the warmth or coolness of a night, the feeling of heaviness or lightness just before dawn, the strange hum in the air when a distant star flickered more slowly than usual. One inscription reads, "Tonight the heavens breathed as one who wakes from a long dream." Another, the star at the shoulder paused as though turning to look back. And another, we felt a trembling, low and wide, as if an unseen chamber had opened. None of these statements are predictions. They are memories of atmospheres, of celestial moods, gentle shadows cast across the inner landscape of the soul. As we walk between the pillars, we begin to understand. This library is not a place of conclusions. It is a place of noticing. We drift into a side chamber. Here, the air feels cooler, more still. A large circular tablet leans against the wall. Upon its surface, countless tiny marks form a spiral that widens outward in expanding ripples. In the center, a hollow has been carved, as though meant to cradle a small object long since lost, or perhaps to hold a breath. Around the spiral, A single line of text reads, "We captured only the echo." This simple statement sends a soft shiver through us. Perhaps the priests knew their work would never grasp the sky's full message. Perhaps they understood that humans can only hold echoes, never the original breath. And yet they carved anyway, committed to the act of listening even when comprehension was impossible. Beneath the silence, that humility lingers in the stone. We step back into the main hall, where the pillars gather like quiet sentinels. Their swirling carvings cast shadows that sway faintly, as if stirred by a wind that no longer moves through the physical world. Tablets shimmer in the moonlight, their inscriptions forming constellations of thought. The library has a pulse. Not a heartbeat exactly, more like a slow, even inhale. The same rhythm the priests once tried to match. In this subterranean sanctuary, it feels as if time has forgotten how to hurry. It drifts, weightless, like dust in a beam of moonlight. Perhaps the breath of the heavens was nothing more than the shared exhale of generations. The way countless people over centuries lifted their eyes to the night sky and wondered, silently, about their place beneath the lights. Perhaps the priests sensed this collective longing and carved it into stone, giving form to a yearning too large to name. We pause near the final alcove. The ceiling above it bears a faint carving of a feather floating downward. Beneath it lies a small platform, and upon that platform rests a broken offering bowl. Inside the bowl, sand has gathered, shaped by unseen currents, into a spiral that tightens at the center, like an inward-looking galaxy. This bowl feels like a punctuation mark at the end of a long, subtle sentence. As we watch, a small breeze makes its way into the chamber. It moves slowly at first, creeping along the sand like a shy visitor. Then, with a soft sigh, it swirls upward, lifting faint dust into the air. The dust dances sparkling, hesitant, brief, and then settles again. The entire hall seems to exhale. The breeze fades, leaving a hush so tender it feels almost warm. We sense in that moment that the library is not dead. It is in a long, slow dream, waiting, listening, holding something fragile. Perhaps what the priests preserved here was not knowledge, but relationship, an ancient intimacy between human breath and cosmic breath. As we prepare to ascend back into the night, we glance once more along the corridor. Moonlight falls on the pillars. Dust glitters like drifting constellations. The silence glows with quiet memory. Some truths are too soft to survive daylight. Some messages are not meant to be deciphered, only felt. And some breaths, ancient, star-marked, veiled in dust, are kept for those who enter with empty hands and open lungs. Perhaps it was never meant to be read. Perhaps it was only ever meant to be remembered. As we leave the library behind, climbing step by slow step toward the desert surface, the wind greets us with a gentle sigh, the same sigh that stirred the bowl of sand below. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Tonight, beneath the patient sky, the breath of the heavens lingers still, subtle as a heartbeat, soft as sleep, waiting to meet the quiet within us. It is said that there are moments when the sky forgets whose turn it is to shine. Not often, only rarely, in forgotten ages, when the world has grown very still and even the wind holds its breath. In such an hour, light and shadow find themselves woven together, neither willing to retreat, neither strong enough to dominate. The result is a strange, dusky half-light, a tender grey that softens edges and loosens certainties. We open on such a moment. Above the desert, the sun and moon appear suspended in a brief, fragile balance. The sun wears a thin, dark ring like a crown turned inside out. The air is dim yet not night, bright yet not day. Colours are muted, the sand glows faintly as if lit from beneath. Animals fall silent. Birds pause as mid-flight. The world stands at a threshold with no door. Deep in the desert, far from river and city, there is a temple that remembers this feeling. From a distance, it looks less like a building and more like a low, brooding hill of stone partially swallowed by sand. Its lines are blurred by time, its colors dulled by dust. Yet as we draw near, we see that its outer walls are carved with faint rings, circles within circles, some light, some dark, overlapping like the ghostly impressions of eclipses past. Whispers tell us this temple was raised not to honor gods or kings, but to honor the interval itself, to pay tribute to the narrow sacred passage when the world becomes neither day nor night, but something in between. We pass through a stone gate whose lintel bears no name, only a shallow spiral flanked by a sun mark and a moon mark. Inside, the light thins. The desert's glare fades into a soft, muted glow that seems to have lost its source. The corridors are low and cool. Dust lies in the corners like a sleeping animal. Within the first chamber, the walls reflect faint rings of shadow and glow, as though the eclipse still lingers there. They are not painted. They are not carved. They are impressions, subtle gradations of darkness and light that cling to the stone as if the very moment of overlap has been pressed into it. When we shift, the rings seem to move, not following our steps, but changing with the quiet rhythm of our breath. It is said that on the day this temple was completed, an eclipse passed directly overhead. No one spoke while it unfolded. Workers laid down their tools. Priests stilled their chants. Even the Pharaoh's retinue ceased their rustling. Together they watched as the sun's bright circle was slowly, gently bitten into by a creeping shadow, until only a thin ring of light remained, trembling around the moon's dark disk. In this temple, the builders captured that trembling. Inside, the altars are not dedicated to figures or faces. No gods with falcon heads or lioness eyes peer down from the walls. Instead, each altar bears a carved symbol for an interval, a narrow sliver between two crescents, a line poised between two dots, a tiny spiral suspended between its first curve and its last. Here we are invited not to worship anyone, but to honor the pause between things. We walk deeper. The floor is smooth and cool. We can imagine the pharaohs of old walking here barefoot, their jeweled sandals left outside, their steps softened by the hush of the place. They came not to ask for victories or long life, but to listen, to the sky, to the silence, to their own hearts, in the moment when the world's usual divisions faltered. Beneath the silence in this hall, even now, something seems to listen back. On one wall, symbols etched into the stone hint at a particular eclipse, unlike any witnessed before. The carving is subtle, easily lost amidst the dust and the erosion of centuries. But when the light falls at just the right angle, we can see it. A sun and moon perfectly overlapped, surrounded not by rays, but by small star-marked circles, as though distant lights were drawn inward to watch. Beside this image, in delicate hieroglyphs, a line reads, Here the day forgot itself. Here the night did not yet begin. Some believe this was the eclipse that whispered the fate of a dynasty. Legends say that during this event, a king stood in the innermost chamber of the temple alone. No priests guided him. No attendants hovered at the edge of the shadows. He walked in, bare of crown and scepter, wrapped only in plain linen, and he waited. As the light outside dimmed, the chamber darkened. For a brief time, it is said, there was no shadow in the room at all. Nothing to cast, nothing to receive. The king felt his own boundaries blur. The edges of his thoughts softened as if his mind were dissolving into a larger, quieter fabric. Then, in that dense pause, the sky murmured. Not in words, not in thunder or flame. Perhaps it was nothing more than the faint realization that his line, his blood, his carefully woven plans would not continue as he had hoped. Perhaps he saw in a fleeting image the rise of strangers in halls he had built, the echo of foreign tongues against his stone. No one knows what he saw or what he heard exactly. When he emerged, the eclipse was already passing. The thin ring of light around the moon had fractured and grown uneven. Shadows lengthened and reassembled themselves upon the desert floor. The king's face was calm, but something in his gait had changed. He walked as one who had set down a heavy object in a place where he could not retrieve it again. Where memory fades, the stones remain. We move into the central chamber, the heart of the temple of the quiet eclipse. The ceiling here is low and slightly domed. At its center, a narrow aperture lets in a controlled beam of light. It does not fall directly downward. Instead, it slants slightly, like a sun ray that has been persuaded to move more gently. On ordinary days, this beam is small and faint, but during an eclipse, legends say, it transforms. Some describe the room filling with a ring of light, delicate but unbroken, clinging to the edges of the dome as if drawn there by invisible hands. Others speak of a slow, pulsing glow, neither bright nor dim, but existing in a kind of luminous middle ground that made shadows appear weightless. At the floor's center, beneath the aperture, lies a low disk of black stone, its surface polished to a mirror. Around it, concentric rings have been carved, each ring divided into segments etched with tiny symbols. Pairs of spirals, small feathers, open eyes, closed ones. This was the altar to the interval itself. The priests who served here did not chant loudly. They did not brandish incense or knives. They stood at the outer ring with heads bowed, and in the precise moment when the sun and moon were entwined, they took one long collective breath, inhaling the dim air, exhaling whatever noise and worry clung to them. Whispers tell us that, in that breath, they believed the sky was breathing too, that something vast and unseen exhaled through the eclipse, letting its quiet pass through human lungs for a single shared instant. It is no wonder the temple feels as it does now, like a lung long emptied, still remembering the rhythm of inhale and exhale. On a cracked pillar near the entrance, we find a more personal inscription, carved in a smaller hand, the day before the last eclipse. I walked here alone, it reads. I heard nothing, but the silence wrapped itself around my chest like an arm. When I left, I knew I would not be the same, even if the heavens spoke no word. The temple is full of these small confessions. In another corner, a faint drawing shows a scroll unrolled and then gently curling back upon itself, as if declining to reveal its contents. Next to it, a single phrase: "What we do not need to know, we are spared." Perhaps that is the hidden heart of this place. Maybe this temple, for all its careful alignment with celestial mechanics, was never meant to be a tool for seeing the future with sharp clarity. Maybe it existed to teach softness, to remind rulers and priests and wanderers that there is holiness in not knowing, in standing beneath a dimmed sky and feeling the limits of one's reach. Beneath the silence, the air here carries a sweetness, almost like relief. We linger in the chamber, watching the rings of shadow and glow shift as the moon outside completes its quiet crossing. The light in the room grows slightly stronger, shadows sharp again. The world resumes its familiar contrasts. Yet the walls seem reluctant to let the moment go. As we step back toward the outer halls, the darkness clings to corners, stretching into long, tender fingers behind us. It is as though the temple itself wishes to keep us for just a heartbeat more, holding us in its dim embrace so we might carry some fragment of its lesson with us. Where memory fades, the shadows stretch long. Outside, the desert will look unchanged. The dunes will hold their curves. The sky will blaze once more with exactitude. Sun above, sand below, clear lines and confident shadows. Travelers may pass by without noticing the worn arch, half buried in the slope. The eclipse will be spoken of for a time, then folded into the thicker scroll of history, its odd light a story told at night and eventually forgotten. But in the temple of the quiet eclipse, the pause remains. It lives on in the rings that seem to shimmer along the walls, in the disk of polished black stone that reflects whatever light is willing to visit, in the faint etchings that speak of breath, of intervals, of unfinished prayers. Perhaps it was never meant to be found by everyone. Perhaps it was meant for those who have grown weary of sharp answers and loud proclamations, for those who are ready to stand in a dim, quiet place and feel, without insisting on understanding, that the universe pauses sometimes too. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some silences only reveal their depth when we stop trying to fill them. As we leave the dim chamber and ascend toward the ordinary light of day, the temple's shadows follow for a moment, stretching long along the floor behind us, as if unwilling to let the past fully rest. Then, gently, they release their hold, curling back into the cool halls, returning to their vigil. The sun emerges from behind the moon, the world brightens, and somewhere beneath that clean, decisive light, a small ancient temple waits patiently for the next time the sky forgets itself and day and night fall into each other's arms, and the universe, for a fragile instant, becomes a single quiet breath. It is said that the best place to listen to the heavens is not in the bustling heart of a city, but where the earth rises quietly to meet the sky. High above the Nile Valley, where the river lies far below like a winding ribbon of starlight fallen to earth, there sits a broken observatory. Once it was crowned by a perfect dome of stone and copper. Now the ceiling has been carved away by time and neglect, leaving only a ring of pillars that frame the sky like a sacred aperture. We arrive at twilight. The last warmth of the sun clings to the stones, soft and tired. Shadows stretch like long thoughts across the floor. A gentle wind carries the faint scent of water from the valley, and the dry, comforting smell of dust, warmed all day, and now beginning to cool. The steps that lead up to the observatory are worn in their centers, polished by the feet of those who came before us, seeking something only the night could give. Within the ring of pillars, stone benches stand in a circle, facing inward and upward at the same time. Their surfaces are smoothed, where countless bodies once rested, cloaked in linen, heads tilted back, eyes searching the great dark above. The scroll those star readers held are long returned to dust, their ink blown into the corners, their meanings drifting in the space between memory and silence. Now only the benches remain, and the sky. Night gathers slowly over the observatory. First a soft blue, then a deeper indigo, as if someone is steadily dimming a lamp behind a veil. One by one, familiar stars awaken. They prick the firmament with tiny points of certainty, a pattern we recognize, even if we cannot name all its pieces. But this temple of watching was never truly built for the visible. In forgotten centuries, a small order of astronomer priests made this place their second home. Whispers tell us they were unlike other servants of the temples. Their devotion was not to statues in shadowed halls or to incense spiraling up toward painted ceilings. Their offerings were attention. Their altar was emptiness. They did not study the stars we see, but the dark spaces between them. Beneath the silence, they believed that the unseen regions of the sky, those gentle velvet gaps where no point of light appears, held their own constellations. Not patterns of brightness, but patterns of absence. Invisible shapes that shifted slowly over ages, marking changes too vast for short-lived eyes. These priests held a quiet, radical belief that the pharaohs received guidance not only from the known constellations traced across temple ceilings, but from constellations that no longer exist, patterns erased by time, stars gone dark, arrangements the sky once wore and then forgot, leaving only the faintest shadows of their influence on the empty spaces in between. As the moon rises, its light drapes over the ring of pillars, painting each one with a slender curve of silver. The floor becomes a patchwork of faint light and deeper shadow. In this soft glow, we can see the tools the astronomer priests left behind. At first glance, they look like simple stones, blocks, slabs, slender wedges. Yet they are arranged with an almost painful care. Set into the floor, certain stones point not at the bright stars we might expect, but toward swaths of empty black. Others mark the boundaries of invisible shapes, the edges of darkness, where nothing yet everything resides. We move among these strange indices. One slab bears a shallow groove, aligned with a portion of sky where no star shines at all. Beside the groove, carved in delicate lines, are the words, "Here once was a companion." Its echo remains. Another stone points toward a gap between two bright stars in a familiar constellation. On its surface, the silence between them is not empty. It listens back. Some stones bear only spirals, circling inward toward a single dot of absence, as though mapping the motion of something we can no longer to see. We begin to sense the melancholy of this science, to devote one's life to studying things erased by time yet, to listening for voices that have fallen quiet, to measuring patterns in what is no longer there, requires a special kind of patience, a willingness to love the echo after the song has ended. It is said that at nights when the sky was especially clear, the astronomer priests did not speak at all. They would climb the long steps from the valley as the last colors of the day fled the horizon. At the observatory's edge, sandals were removed. Bare feet touched the stone. Scrolls and ink were laid aside. Only after the world had settled into true night would they lie back on the benches, arms folded, faces turned upward. Their eyes did not seek the bold, bright arcs of known constellations. They traced instead the shapes between them, the black rivers running around islands of light, the quiet gulfs where no star seemed to dwell. Some believe they were searching for hints of worlds that had already burned out, whose light had faded long before any human eye could receive it. Others say they were listening to the future, reading in the blank spaces the possibilities that had not yet bloomed into brightness. To them, darkness was not a lack, but a promise, a field of unlit stars. In their scrolls, those that have survived in fragments, they rarely draw the stars themselves. Instead, they draw outlines of dark, curving belts of emptiness, labeled not with names, but with feelings: calm, warning, remembrance, change. For these priests, the sky was not a static map. It was a living text, with some lines written in fire and others in ink so pale only the heart could see it. Some nights, the Pharaoh came. Not in full regalia, not surrounded by spectacle, but quietly, cloaked, slipping into the observatory like a student entering a late lesson. He would sit among the star readers and, for a time, surrender the weight of his titles and titles. In the dark, beneath a vault of visible and invisible patterns, rank lost its edges. Together, they listened to a sky full of vanished companions and unborn arrangements. Waspers tell us that great decisions were tempered here, not by prophecy shouted in frenzy, but by the gentle influence of what did not speak, only remained. The pharaohs were reminded that what they saw, their palaces, their armies, their monuments, was only a bright pattern on the surface of something more vast. Where memory fades, the unseen endures. We run our fingers over a broken fragment of stone on the floor. Its surface bears a short inscription. The stars we know are only the accents. The sentence lies in the dark. There is a quiet ache in such words, a bittersweet patience. To search for meaning in what is missing is to live in a kind of perpetual longing. Yet it is also to stand in awe before the limits of one's own sight. Around us, the ring of pillars rises, framing more sky as the night deepens. The familiar stars now stand in their full clarity, bright and sharp in the cool air. Between them, the spaces also deepen. Black grows thicker, more textured, like a velvet curtain with unknown shapes moving behind it. Beneath the silence, we can almost feel what the astronomer priests felt when they tilted their heads back this way. A sense of being held in a gaze we cannot see. The awareness that our lives, however large they may seem to us, are small embellishments on a much longer story written in invisible ink. As time moved forward, the world below changed. Dynasties rose and fell along the Nile's banks. New conquerors came, their languages different, their gods wearing other faces. The observatory high on the hill crumbled, its dome collapsing in a patient downward spiral. Scrolls were taken or lost. The order of priests, devoted to the unseen sky, faded from memory, their names erased by other priorities. Still, the pillars stood, looking upward, where their roof once enclosed and concentrated the heavens into a single circle of sight. Now nothing interrupts the sky. The observatory is as open as a palm. The ring of stone, the benches of dust-smeared rock, the strange indices carved into the floor. All of it acts as an echo of a time when humans dared to devote themselves to what cannot be easily measured or recorded. We stand among their abandoned tools and feel that echo. It is a melancholy not sharp enough to hurt, but deep enough to hush. It reminds us of quiet rooms after everyone has gone home, of books whose pages stay pressed together for years, of instruments resting with strings slack, yet still shaped for song. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Perhaps the unseen speaks most clearly to those who have learned how to sit in such rooms without needing to fill them. The moon is high now. Its light slides across the floor, touching one stone index, then another, as if following a path laid down long ago. When it strikes a particular slab, we see, carved along its length, a single spiral flanked by two dots, one filled, one hollow. Below, a short line. Between what has shone and what will shine there is a kindness. We do not fully understand what they meant, but the words settle into the air like a feather, light yet significant. Landing somewhere inside us, rather than on the stone at last, we come to the center of the broken observatory. Here, the floor is smooth, uninterrupted, except for a shallow groove forming a ring. Once, perhaps, a circle of small fires or lamps stood here, mirroring the unknown constellations above. Now only the groove remains, filled with fine dust traced occasionally by the slow, deliberate foot of the wind. We stand within this ring and tilt our gaze upward. The sky is vast, the stars are countless. The dark spaces between them are more numerous still. For a moment, just a breath, we let our attention soften away from the lights and drift into the spaces between. We do not see shapes, not clearly. We do not suddenly grasp some hidden cosmic sentence, but we feel something we cannot name. A low, steady presence, old and unhurried, as if the unseen is not empty, but resting. Marked by the moon, a single star flickers through the broken roof. It is small and easily missed, lost among its louder companions. Yet, in this moment, as the night air cools the stones and the observatory's ring of pillars cradles our sight, its tremble feels like an answer, not a loud, clear reply, not a revelation, just the hint that even what we cannot see, cannot prove, may still be speaking in its own slow language. Perhaps it was never meant to be fully understood. Perhaps the astronomer priests knew this and loved it anyway. They devoted themselves to traces and absences, to hollows and gaps. To them, the unseen was not an enemy of knowledge, but its quiet companion, a reminder that wonder does not need to be resolved to be real. Where memory fades, the pillars remain. The dust gathers. The sky continues its unhurried rearrangement, and the observatory that faced the unseen still stands, half ruin, half instrument, high above the river, watching the dark as carefully as it once watched the light. As we leave, our steps stirring thin veils of sand, the single star continues to flicker overhead. The night does not explain itself. It does not need to. Some things, like the spaces between stars and the spaces between our own thoughts, are not meant to be filled, only honored. And so the story settles, softly, like dust upon old stone, quiet, unresolved, and deeply, gently alive. It is said that in forgotten corners of the earth, there are places where the sky has touched down, not gently, like a kiss, but with the weight of something ancient remembering its own gravity. Somewhere beyond the reach of cities, past the last oasis and the last known trail, there lies one such place, a wound of shimmering glass in the heart of the desert, glistening beneath the moon as though still cooling after a great celestial breath. We arrive at dusk, when the heat begins to loosen its grip, and the sand exhales a faint, dusty warmth. The horizon blurs into shades of lavender and rose, then softens into twilight. As the light dims, the land ahead brightens, faintly, strangely, as though lit from within. A vast sheet of sand gives way to a smooth, glass-like plain, cracked into great circular patterns that spread outward from an unseen center. Travelers speak of this place in low, uncertain voices. Some call it the Sea of Fallen Light. Others name it the Mirror of the Unborn Star. But the oldest legends say simply, this is where the sky once fell. The ground beneath our feet turns hard, brittle. Our steps ring softly, producing sounds more fitting for ancient temple floors than shifting dunes. We kneel and touch the glass. It is cool, not cold, but holding the memory of a chill that was once far greater than any earthly night. Long ago, so the myth tells, a star descended here. Not in fury, not in punishment, but in a gesture of arrival. Some believe the star was not falling at all, but choosing a place to rest, choosing a moment to break the distance between the heavens and the earth. And when it met the desert, the sand melted in an instant, fusing into waves and ridges of translucent stone that glitter now like frozen lightning. We walk further. The surface becomes uneven, textured with ripples that resemble the patterns left by wind across dunes. But here the ripples are stiff, captured in mid-motion, as though the desert had been interrupted during its endless work, and the interruption became permanent. Beneath the moonlight, the glass plane glows faintly. It is not reflection. The glow seems to come from within the material itself, as if a thin ribbon of starlight were trapped inside, still searching for an escape. Whispers tell us that Pharaohs once sent priests to this place. Wrapped in linen and silence, the priests gathered shards of melted stone, thin pieces as fragile as dried leaves and thick ones with the weight of tablets. They claimed each shard bore sky letters, symbols formed not by human hands, but by the heat of the star itself. We find a fragment half buried at the edge of a dune. Its surface is smooth and dark, but when we tilt it, a faint pattern glints in soft curves. Not writing, not in any script we know. Instead, it resembles a celestial map, if the stars could twist and curl like living things. Strange arcs intersect, forming spirals that widen and contract, like the path of a wandering comet, like breath made visible. Some believe these symbols are warnings. Others insist they are songs. Still others say the star imparted a message too large to fit into any language, and the symbols are merely its echo. Shadows cast by a truth we are not meant to hold directly. Beneath the silence, the glass plane hums. Not a sound exactly, more a sensation, a subtle vibration in the soles of our feet, as though the desert still remembers the impact, still reverberates with the last gesture of the descending star. As we walk toward the center of the plane, the glass grows clearer. We begin to see shapes beneath its surface, faint streaks of white, curled like smoke, darker swirls, like night gathered into coils, a single long line that cuts across the plane, thin as a hair, and glowing faintly blue, as though marking the trajectory of something impossibly distant. Some say that if you place your palm gently on this glass at midnight, it warms beneath your touch, a slow, pulsing warmth, like the heartbeat of something buried deep beneath the earth. Others say that if you stand here long enough, you may see reflections of stars that no longer shine above. Ghost constellations. The sky as it once was, or as it will one day be. Revealed not by light, but by memory. Where memory fades, the sand remembers. We approach a hill of blackened stone rising from the glass plain, a solitary mound, unmelted, marked with deep scorching around its base. At its summit sits a shallow basin carved long before the star ever fell. Inside the basin lies a scattering of pale ash and small shards of fused glass. The arrangement looks intentional, ceremonial. Priests once knelt here. They arranged the shards according to ancient star charts, laying each piece as though it represented a lost voice. The shards hummed faintly in the night air. The priests would close their eyes, listening for meanings too subtle for language. They recorded what they felt in soft sand beside the mound, letting the wind erase their traces by morning. One fragment of lore remains. It was not the star that fell, the priests wrote. It was a message seeking form. We continue walking across the glass. The night deepens. The moon is high now, and its thin light spreads like pale silk across the desert. But it is the dunes at the plain's edge that capture our gaze next. They glow faintly, not with moonlight, but with their own soft luminescence, as if the fallen star left a breath of itself, not only here, but across the sands surrounding it. The dunes seem to shift with a gentler rhythm, glowing and dimming almost imperceptibly. The effect is hypnotic, a tide of light, a slow inhalation, a slow release. The desert breathing in a language older than stone. Perhaps the star carried with it not fire, but memory. Perhaps the glass plane is an imprint of a moment too vast for human comprehension. A cosmic event paused, as though the universe wished to mark this place with its own signature. We pause and look back at our path. A thin trail of footprints crosses the glass, ephemeral as lines on water. Beneath them, faint reflections ripple, not reflections of us, but of something moving deep within the surface, something that shifts like starlight seen through tears. We realize the desert is not silent. It is simply speaking too slowly for most ears. For hours, perhaps for centuries, it has been repeating a message the star left behind, an echo of a greeting, or a farewell, or a question. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. We reach the center of the plain at last. Here, the glass is at its clearest. Light travels through it in slow waves, revealing internal layers. Veins of faint gold, ribbons of pale blue, bubbles frozen in perfect spheres. The patterns resemble the swirling forms seen in nebulae. We feel as though we stand not on Earth, but on the surface of a star captured mid-breath. At the very heart of the plain lies a deep circular impression, as if something once rested here. The crater is shallow, rimmed with translucent ridges that shine like ice. No heat remains, only a profound sense of arrival. We kneel. The air is cool. The stars above seem sharper, as though drawn closer by the memory of the fallen one. The dunes around us continue their slow breathing glow, and in the stillness of this place, we feel a softness rising, like an emotion too large to name, like grief without sorrow, awe without fear. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps this place is a reminder that not all messages need translation. Some simply ask us to stand in their presence and let the silence speak its own truth. Beneath the silence, the desert hums. The sky above, though unchanged, feels newly intimate. We see not only what shines, but what once shone. We sense not only what is, but what was carried here long ago. A moment when heaven met earth not in violence, but in recognition. In that quiet recognition, something vast pressed itself gently into the sand, leaving behind this shimmering scar that glows now like a memory that refuses to fade. We rise slowly from the crater and begin our walk back across the plain. Our reflections flicker in the glass. One moment clear, the next blurred into shapes that resemble figures long gone. The desert wind sighs at our backs, as though guiding us out with a tender hand. Where memory fades, the glass remembers. And as we leave this sacred wound beneath the moon, we understand. This landscape is not a ruin. It is an echo, an imprint, a breath the sky once exhaled and never reclaimed. A reminder that sometimes the universe speaks not through stars shining overhead, but through the quiet, shimmering places where they once touched the earth and left behind their light. Under the full moon, the desert becomes a silver sea. It is said that on certain nights, when the sky is clear and the wind has tired of its own voice, shapes rise from the dunes that are not entirely made of sand, in forgotten stretches beyond the routes of caravans, where maps grow hesitant and memory fades. One such shape waits. At first, it is only a shadow, a darker outline against the pale, shifting ridges. As the moon climbs higher, its light smooth and unwavering. The dunes around this shadow recede like a slow tide. Sand slips down in thin, shimmering streams, whispering over stone that has not felt open air in many years. And then the silhouette reveals itself. The colossal body of a sphinx, half buried, patient, emerging from the drifts. Unlike its famous counterpart that watches the horizon with stern forward gaze, this sphinx lifts its face toward the sky. Its profile is lion and human in the old familiar way. Paws outstretched, chest broad and still. Human face framed by a stone headdress now softened by time. But the eyes are different. They are carved not to reflect the sun, but to receive the stars. Each eye is a shallow, polished hollow, angled perfectly upward. Under the full moon, they glimmer with the reflection of a night that is not quite this night, as if still holding the echo of older skies. Whispers tell us this sphinx once guarded a gate that was not built of stone, nor closed with wood or metal. A celestial gate, visible only on certain nights, when the stars slipped into a hidden alignment and the sky opened like a slow, soundless scroll. We stand at the edge of its great shadow. Beneath the silence, the air feels heavier here. As though carrying the weight of unsaid prayers, the dunes around the Sphinx are shaped differently from the rest of the desert, curved in subtle spirals, marked by faint ridges as if something once radiated from this point, rippling outward. We approach one of its massive paws. The stone is worn, yet the toes retain their distinct form, each claw a weathered crescent. Around the base, carved in the narrow band between flesh-shaped stone and the sand that presses up against it, we find inscriptions. Not in the bold, declarative style that boasts of victories and lineages, but in small, intimate lines, words tucked close to the ground, as if whispered rather than proclaimed. we brush away the dust. Underneath, we read prayers written to stars whose names are no longer spoken. The one who walks behind the shoulder of the hunter. One line begins, the one that glows and does not belong to any constellation. Reads another, the one that fell and rose again. The stars are described by their habits, by how they feel to those who watch them, not by hard names. These prayers are not requests for wealth or conquest. They are offerings of attention. We have seen your wandering, says one inscription. If there is a gate, may we stand near it, though we do not pass. The chapter becomes a meditation on guardianship, on what it means to protect something invisible. The Sphinx did not guard a door that could be barred. It guarded a place in the desert where the sky was rumored to thin, to grow delicate, to fold over itself. On certain nights, when particular stars crossed paths in ways understood only by the most patient sky watchers, a corridor of light was said to appear above this very spot. Not a beam, not a pillar, more like a faint, vertical river of starlight, falling silently from no visible source, disappearing into the sand. Some believed it was a passage for souls. Others, a route for messages between worlds too far apart to shout. A few whispered that it was neither entry nor exit, but an agreement, a meeting place where heaven and earth could regard one another without haste. The Sphinx, with its upward gaze, was placed here as guardian and witness. Where memory fades, stone remembers. Legends say that pharaohs who feared what they could not see would not come here. Others, more curious or more weary, would travel under cover of night, leaving behind palaces of polished stone for the rough serenity of this lonely guardian. They would stand in the hollow between the Sphinx paws, wrapped in plain linen, without crown or staff. The astronomer priests would murmur softly, consulting scrolls stiffened by sand and moonlight, waiting for the signs to match the old diagrams drawn with star-marked ink. When the time was right, they would say nothing at all. They would simply lift their eyes, as the Sphinx did, and see if the gate would appear. It is said that those who came on the true nights, those rare intervals when the sky remembered the path, saw something not of this world. Not a god in human form, not a lion-headed protector or ibis-faced scribe, but a pattern in the dark that felt like being recognized. A soft echo in the chest, a pulling upward, not of the body, but of the heart. Yet no one could ever prove they had seen anything. The scrolls kept in the valley temples recorded dates, alignments, careful angles. They described the position of the Sphinx relative to the horizon, the height of the moon, the path of the certain stars. But when it came to the gate itself, the words grew hesitant, the air wavered. The night felt thinner. There was a silence that did not belong to this earth. No stone shows an image of the gate. No carving dares to depict it. Perhaps the priests feared that enclosing it in a picture would claim what could not be claimed. Or perhaps, standing beneath that unseen threshold, they felt more moved to protect its secrecy than to replicate it. Beneath the silence, this choice still vibrates. We circle the Sphinx now, the sand soft underfoot. Along its flank, partially uncovered by some persistent wind, more inscriptions line the stone. They speak of guardianship not as power, but as humility. To watch and not hold, reads one. To know and not own, reads another. Between these lines, small spirals and star-like marks twist and cluster. We can imagine the hands that carve them, tired, reverent, tracing the same grooves over and over as if deepening the path of their own devotion. As moonlight glides along the Sphinx face, the carved eyes catch it. For a moment, the eyes gleam, not with their own light, but with the borrowed radiance of the night. Their upward tilt reflects not just the moon, but scattered stars, as tiny points of silver gather and swim in their hollow gaze. The Sphinx appears to be watching something beyond the visible pattern of constellations, something that moves through the dark like a thought passing through a mind, leaving no visible trail yet altering the landscape within. We rest in the shadow of its chest. The desert is cold now. The air has that particular midnight quality that feels both crisp and ancient, as if it has traveled far to be here. In the distance, dunes rise and fall in slow, frozen waves. The stillness is so complete that the tiniest shift of sand sounds loud inside it. Somewhere above, the sky stretches without seam. Some believe the starlit gate was never really in the sky at all. They say it opened inside those who stood beneath it, aligning their inner darkness with the outer one, letting them feel for a brief, trembling moment the echo of something vast and kind. Others insist the gate was a real celestial phenomenon, a tunnel of light, a road of dust connecting scattered realms, that those who saw it stood at the edge of an oceanic crossing, too immense to traverse in a single lifetime. Perhaps both can be true. Where memory fades, stories try to carry what they can. We lie back on the cool sand near the Sphinx paws, mirroring the posture of the ancient star readers. Above us, stars burn with their usual calm intensity, strewn across the vault in 1,000 careful points. The longer we gaze, the more we see. Faint bands, darker patches, subtle sparks at the edge of sight. The longer we gaze, the more we feel something else. A soft stirring not in the sky, but within. A sense of being watched not by a single point of light, but by the dark between them. As if the unseen spaces are waiting, listening, holding questions we have not yet learned to ask. The Sphinx presence presses gently against our awareness. It has watched for lifetimes. Sand has climbed and retreated along its flanks. Kingdoms have risen and crumbled beyond the horizon. Still it keeps its upward gaze, its patient vigil over a gate that may or may not open again. Guardianship, we begin to understand, is not about control. It is about keeping a place ready, keeping a promise safe, even when the one who made it has forgotten. Being willing to stand between worlds and say, with a silent, stone-bound devotion, "If it returns, I will be here." Perhaps the starlit gate has long since closed. Perhaps it shifted elsewhere, following new alignments, new watchers. Or perhaps it never truly left. Perhaps it flickers now only in imagination, a doorway whose presence we feel more than see. Some doors open only when the sky remembers them. As the moon begins its slow descent, her light flows along the Sphinx face one last time, sliding from brow to nose to chin like a farewell touch. The carved eyes dim, releasing their borrowed stars back to the vault of. The dunes around us lose their faint glow, settling into a softer darkness. The starlit gate remains unseen, yet its echo lingers. In the curve of the Sphinx neck, in the inscriptions cradled near its paws, in the hush that settles over the desert, as if it too is listening for something distant. We rise, brushing sand from our clothes. The night is deep now. The path back is only a suggestion, outlined by memory and moonlight. We take a last look at the upward-gazing guardian, half buried, half awake, waiting under a sky that never stops changing. Beneath the silence, we feel the old question still hanging in the air. Who watches whom? Do we watch the stars, or do they watch us? Do we guard the sacred places, or do they guard something quiet within us that we are afraid to lose? No answer comes. The Sphinx does not move. The sky does not part. And yet, as we turn away, there is a strange comfort in this unresolved vigil, in knowing that somewhere, under the full moon or in the memory of one, a stone guardian continues to keep watch over a door made not of material, but of possibility. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some gates open only when the heart has grown quiet enough to notice that they were never entirely closed. In the distance, the silhouette of the Sphinx fades back into the drifting sands. The night folds around it like a cloak, and the desert, vast and patient, resumes its breathing beneath a starlit sky that may, at any moment, remember the hidden doorway between its scattered lights. It is said that some rulers trusted their counselors, some trusted their gods, and a very few trusted the quiet. In forgotten corners of old palaces, where torchlight seldom reached and servants did not wander, there were doors that led to places not found on any plan, hidden terraces, narrow and high, where the world fell away and only sky remained. Our story begins on one such terrace, carved into the side of a royal dwelling like a secret thought kept apart from waking life. The stone door to this place never bore a guard. It was unmarked, half veiled in shadow at the end of a seldom used corridor. Those who served in the palace learned, without being told, that this door was not to be opened, not cleaned, not repaired. It belonged to hours when others slept. Beyond it, a short passage opened into the night. We step through now, as he once did, and find ourselves in the soft hush between worlds. The terrace stretches out over the sleeping desert, a simple platform of stone bordered by a low wall. The wind here is gentler than in the open dunes. It moves as though remembering that these stones have known the weight of a listening heart. The sky above is a dark bowl poured with stars. Far below, the desert lies like a vast, unmoving sea, its waves of sand washed pale by moonlight. The familiar noise of the palace, voices, footsteps, the clink of vessels, the crackle of braziers, has faded to a distant murmur, as if coming from another lifetime. Up here there is only the rustle of night air and the quiet crunch of our steps. This is where legends say a pharaoh came alone each night. He was not always a restless man. In his youth, he believed, as many did, that guidance came from councils, from omens read in animal entrails, or dreams interpreted by temple priests. But as the years unfolded and the weight of his decisions grew heavier than the gold upon his brow, something in him began to seek a different conversation. Whispers tell us that it began with a single sleepless night. Pressed by conflicts at the borders, whispers of betrayal, and the endless turning of the river's needs, he found no comfort in the painted ceilings or carved pillars of his chambers. The words of his advisors echoed in his mind, louder than they should, each voice tugging the future in a different direction. So he walked, barefoot, wrapped in a plain cloak over his royal linen. He slipped away from the guarded doors and familiar halls, drawn by an instinct older than his crowns. His feet found the corridor few used, the unmarked door no one cleaned, the narrow passage that smelled faintly of dust and cool stone. He stepped out onto this very terrace. The air embraced him with a calm he had not known since childhood. The sky lay vast and unjudging above him. The moon, marked by a delicate halo, hung like a watchful eye, throwing silver across the desert. The pharaoh, who had all his life been the one observed, suddenly felt himself to be the one observing. Beneath the silence, something in him loosened. He sank to the floor near the wall, his back against the stone still warm from the day's sun. For a while he said nothing. He simply breathed and watched, letting the distant constellations trace their slow paths. Then, as if unable to carry the weight alone any longer, he began to speak. Not in the formal cadence used in court or ritual, but in the simple, unadorned speech of a man speaking to a friend who will not interrupt. He spoke of fear, of the river's unpredictable nature, of a sun he did not understand, of the thin line between justice and cruelty when ruling over so many lives. He confessed to the sky the things he would never admit to his scribes. Doubts, memories of times when he had chosen wrongly, questions about whether any human hand could bear so much. He expected no answer, but something happened in that long dark. Scribes who later combed the records trying to understand this pharaoh's peculiar habits noted a change in him after that night. His decisions grew stranger, yet truer. He began to reject the louder voices, choosing instead courses of action that seemed, for a time, foolish. And yet, seasons later, those choices bore fruit in ways no counselor could have anticipated. They wrote that his decisions came not from counsel, but from dreams born in his night walks. Night after night, he returned to the terrace. He made no offerings at an altar. He lit no incense. This was not a temple, and yet it became one. The offerings here were words and breath, and the deity was not a statue in a shadowed hall, but the vast unblinking face of midnight itself. We move now across the terrace, our fingers brushing faint markings along the low wall. They are subtle, almost lost to the wear of time, crescents carved with delicate hands, small spirals like coiled questions, lines that curve upward like outstretched hands. Here and there, traces of paint linger in the grooves, pale blue, a whisper of gold, a trace of white. Scattered on the floor near the wall, offerings have turned to dust, fragments of what were once flowers, now indistinguishable from the sand that the wind carries. A scrap of something like linen, its fibers clinging stubbornly to existence. A small stone carved with a star mark, its edges softened, but its intention intact. These offerings are not grand. They are not the kind one display in a great temple. They seem almost private, like tokens left by a child under a pillow. Some believe that over time, the terrace became known to a few others. A trusted scribe, perhaps, or a high priest who understood the king's need for a place where no ritual governed his words. They may have come here in the hush before dawn, leaving small gifts and quiet prayers scornful not to disturb the greater dialogue that took place between ruler and sky. The air still feels thick with unsaid words. It is as though midnight itself once listened here, and having listened, refused to let go of the syllables it was entrusted with. They hang invisible in the spaces between stone and sky, like faint echoes waiting for ears that know how to hear them. We sit, as the pharaoh once did. The stone is cool. The desert is a dark ocean stretching to the horizon, its waves of sand barely suggested by shadows. Above, the stars burn in their familiar patterns. Some of them he would have known by name. Others he might have given names no one remembers now. Still others he might simply have regarded with a kind of silent, unlabeled awe. In the ancient records, there are hints that the pharaoh believed the sky answered him. Not in words, not in clear instructions, but in the way his dreams unfurled afterward, carrying images imbued with a quiet certainty. He would lie down after returning from the terrace, the cool of stone still in his bones, and sleep would come quickly, lowering over him like a veil. In those dreams, deserts might bloom or wither. Rivers might rise and recede, faces might appear, not as they were in life, but as they might become. He would wake not with a memory of sentences spoken, but with a feeling. Yes, this way. Or, no, not yet. By day, he would sit in audience chambers and listen to the voices around him. Generals, priests, foreign envoys. Their words stacked up like bricks, forming walls of argument and counsel. He acknowledged them. He weighed them. But somewhere beneath those walls, the hidden foundation of his choices was laid in the soft language of midnight. It is said that those who knew him well could tell which decisions came from the terrace. They were the ones that felt inevitable. Not in the sense of fate, but in the way a breath taken after holding the lungs too long feels inevitable. Correct, not because they pleased everyone, but because they released some tension the kingdom had been holding unseen. As we watch now, the moon drifts behind a thin veil of cloud. Her bright outline softens. The terrace darkens by a shade. The stars seem to grow a little bolder in the dimness. The desert loses its sharp contours, becoming again an impression, a suggestion of waves and hollows. The terrace seems to exhale a secret it cannot quite release. The stone beneath our hands carries the faint chill of countless nights. The markings along the wall wait without impatience. They have time, more than we do. They have seen rains come and go, languages shift, rituals rise and crumble. Yet the quiet ritual that took place here, one person speaking into the dark, listening in return, remains legible without translation. Perhaps the Pharaoh's dialogue with midnight was never about receiving answers. Perhaps it was about being heard by something too vast to be threatened by human frailty. A place to admit what cannot be admitted in rooms lit by braziers and ringed with carved pillars. Here, under an open sky, he could be small without losing his dignity. We stand and walk toward the edge of the terrace. Beyond the low wall, the desert drops away sharply. Far below, a faint glimmer hints at the Nile's presence, reflecting starlight in thin, broken threads. The breeze rises for a moment, stirring our garments, then subsides. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. If we close our eyes and let our own thoughts settle like dust on the floor, we can almost sense another presence here. Not a ghost in the usual sense, but a habit of attention, a worn path in the invisible, created by all those nights when a weary ruler walked through the unmarked door, crossed this stone, sat where we now stand, and whispered his heart upward. In that sense, the terrace is not empty. It is full of questions, of confessions, of quiet agreement made between a human life and the unblinking sky. Perhaps it was never meant to be found by many. Perhaps this place was meant to be a reminder, left for those who stumble upon it by curiosity or by need, that there is wisdom in turning away from the noise and seeking a conversation with what does not shout. Beneath the silence, we feel our own breathing slow, matching something older, calmer. The stars watch without judgment. The moon slips further behind her gauze of cloud, then begins to emerge again, patient and unchanged. We know nothing more concrete than when we arrived. No new constellations have formed. No radiant visions have split the night. And yet, something within us feels tended to, the way a plant feels tended to when someone finally remembers to water it. The Pharaohs' dialogue with midnight may never have been recorded in scrolls or carved on stone, but its shape survives here. In the faint crescents etched into the wall, in the scattered offerings turned to dust, in the thickness of the air that has grown accustomed to holding unspoken words. As we turn to leave, the terrace remains behind us, a quiet altar without a statue, a temple without a roof, open forever to stars that will continue their slow turning long after our own footsteps are lost. The door back into the corridor waits, shadowed and patient. We step through, and somewhere outside, high above the desert, the terrace stays where it has always been. Stone facing sky, sky facing stone. A place where, on certain nights, midnight still pauses long enough to listen to whoever dares to speak softly into its endless, echoing dark. It is said that before the first pyramid carved its sharp edge against the sky, before the earliest kings wrapped their names in rings of stone, there was a star that had already gone out. Its fire had finished. Its heart had grown cold. Somewhere far beyond the reach of the human footsteps, its last ember had folded in upon itself and fallen into silence. And yet for centuries after its death, its light continued to travel. By the time that ghost light reached the valley of the Nile, people had learned to watch the heavens with careful eyes and careful hearts. They had already traced bright shapes across the dark, hunters and birds and boats of light, tying their myths to the steady procession of familiar stars. But this star, the one that refused to die, did not behave quite like the others. In forgotten scrolls softened by age and grit, there are mentions of it written in an almost hesitant hand. The scribes do not give it a name we can easily pronounce. They call it instead the lingering flame, the light after, or simply the star that came late. Whispers tell us that when the temple astronomer priests first noticed it, they were not impressed. It was small, modest, a pale bead of brightness at the edge of a constellation they already knew. It did not flash across the sky in a streak of glory, did not shift colors, did not call attention to itself. It simply appeared, night after night, precisely where no star should have been. As their instruments grew more refined, in those early ways of refinement, sharpened eyes and measured angles, strings weighted with stone, they discovered that, by all their reckonings, the star was impossible. If their observations of the heavens were true, then the star they now beheld had already burned out long before any man along the Nile had raised his eyes to these particular skies. What they were seeing was not the star itself, but its last light finally arriving. Time has become confused, some priests murmured, half in awe, half in quiet unease. We are looking into a past that persists as if it were present. They began to mark its appearance with special symbols. Small dots encircled by spirals, carved onto temple roofs and in narrow margins of scrolls where only the initiated would know to look. The star's slow arrival became less an oddity and more a kind of sacred puzzle. Beneath the silence of those early nights, they sat on stone terraces and tried to understand the paradox of a celestial ghost. We follow them now in imagination. We walk through halls where rituals once rose and fell like breath. The walls bear faded paintings of boats and suns and kings in profile. Dust has settled into every carved groove, softening sharp edges, muting the once bright colors. Yet above, if we look closely, we can see the tiny persistent dots that were meant for a select few, the sign of the lingering light, hidden among more obvious skies. In one chamber, an inner roof opens to the night. The stone around the opening is carved with stars in orderly rows. But one corner shows a different pattern, a small cluster offset from the rest, encircled in a ring. Beneath it, scratched so lightly it is easy to miss, the inscription reads, "Born in darkness, arriving now." At first, the priests simply observed. They measured the arc of the wandering planets, the slow swelling and shrinking of familiar stars, and always, in the corner of their notes, a mark, the star still present. Night after night, it hung in the same small cradle of black, a persistent guest at the edge of every chart. Over time, something in their regard changed. The star no longer felt like an error in their tables. It felt like a message, a presence that insisted on being seen long after logic dictated it had no right to shine. Some believed it carried news from an earlier universe, that its light was a scroll unfolding across the fabric of time, bringing with it whispers of ages no living creature could remember. Others thought it was a sign meant specifically for them, for their generation, their king, their stretch of riverbank, delivered late, yet not too late. It is said that one pharaoh in particular grew fond of the star. At dusk, he would stand in the temple courtyard, while the priests traced its rising path with fingers and murmured numbers. When all other stars felt like faithful servants, he looked at this one as a stubborn elder, a witness to things older than his throne, older than his language, older perhaps than the gods whose names he carried. "Tell me, Edtun," he asked his chief star reader on a warm night, with the river smelling of silt and lotus, "how can a dead star still speak?" The priest bowed his head. "What we see, Great One, is not the star," he answered carefully. "What we see is the journey of its last light. It is already silent where it is, but here its story has only just arrived." From that night forward, the pharaoh ordered ceremonies to be held beneath its fading glow. Not grand festivals with trumpets and banners, but quieter rites at a certain hour when the star rose to its accustomed place. Torches in one inner courtyard would be lowered. Priests would stand in a circle, facing that particular patch of sky, and recite prayers for a star whose death had already occurred. They did not ask for favors. They did not bargain. They spoke instead of gratitude. "Your light has traveled so far to reach us," one chant began. "You burned out before we were born, and yet you choose to shine on us now. Teach us to live in such a way that our own light may go on traveling long after our fires are finished." The rituals were simple, but the feeling they left in the air was not. Wandering through these halls now, long after the torches have burned down to ash and the voices have gone quiet, we can still sense both awe and sorrow in their devotion. The stones remember, in their own way. The courtyards hold an echo of footsteps taken in reverence. The painted walls bear hairline cracks where heat once rose from gathered bodies, standing shoulder to shoulder in the cool of night. Beneath the silence, there is a tenderness here. We imagine the priests lifting their eyes, knowing that somewhere, unimaginably far away, the star they honored had already collapsed into something they had no words for. And yet its light still wrapped their valley in a faint, persistent glow. They knew, in their own way, that they were living in the afterglow of an absence. When the star began, slowly, to dim, their attention sharpened. At first, the change was so slight that it could not be captured in ink or chisel. The star was there, as it had been, small and steady. But over seasons, then years, some nights found it a little fainter, a little more easily obscured by thin clouds or the dust of summer heat. Scrolls from that time grow more urgent. The light is softer, one record notes. If we do not look for it, we almost forget. Another bears only a single line beneath a carefully inked chart of positions. We have grown used to its presence. We are not ready for its absence. The ceremonies changed. Priests, who had once spoken calmly of gratitude, now added litanies of farewell. Their prayers did not ask the star to remain. They knew better than to petition heaven for the impossible. Instead, they asked that, when it finally slipped away from their sky, some part of its lesson would remain in their people. Teach us, they murmured, to consider our actions as light that will one day reach those we will never see. In time, the star's visits became rarer. On some nights, clouds or dust swallowed it completely. On others, it appeared only briefly between the branches of constellations, like a shy guest slipping into a gathering only long enough to be seen, then choosing to stand in the hallway instead. The priests marked each successful sighting with a ring of ink around their charts. We picture them now, standing on the temple roof, squinting against the whisper of night wind, breath held, waiting for that small pulse of brightness to appear where their calculation insisted it should be. There is something heartbreakingly human in that posture of waiting. Then, on one night, recorded only in a handful of surviving lines, the star did not appear. The priests waited until their lamps burned low. They checked and rechecked their instruments. They inspected the sky from different vantage points, peering around pillars and along the edges of roof lines, as if a slightly different angle might coax the lost light back into view. Nothing. On the second night, still nothing. On the third, the same. Where memory fades, the heavens forget as well, one weary inscription reads. The kingdom held a vigil, as if mourning a dear companion. Torches were dimmed, not in fear, but in respect. In the courtyard where the star's ceremonies had taken place for so long, people gathered in silence. No elaborate offerings were laid out. No great fires were built. They offered instead their stillness. Mothers held children who did not understand why everyone whispered. Old soldiers leaned on their staffs, remembering battles fought under that stubborn light. Young scribes clutched their writing tools, suddenly aware of how fragile it is to record anything at all. The star did not return that night either. In the sky, other stars shone as they always had. The constellations wheeled through their slow choreography unconcerned. The moon rose and fell. The river flowed beyond the temple walls. And yet, to those who had watched the ghost light for so long, the sky felt altered, its familiar patterns now carrying the faint outline of an absence, like a painting where a single tiny dot of color has been meticulously scraped away. In the centuries that followed, the star that refused to die lived on only in ink and stone. Later generations would read the old scrolls and tilt their heads back, trying to find the exact place in the darkness where it had once appeared. They guessed, they argued. They traced their fingers over the symbols carved on temple ceilings, feeling for a faint pulse that was no longer there. But the star itself had finished its journey. Its last photons had arrived, kissed the eyes of those who loved them, and gone on where light goes when it no longer belongs to sight. Perhaps it was never meant to be found forever. Perhaps its brief tenure in the night was a kindness, an invitation to remember that we, too, live in the echo of what has already been, and that our own lives may cast glows far beyond the span we imagine. As we leave the halls where those rituals once echoed, the night outside feels different. The sky above us is clear, bright, filled with stars unaffected by the absence of one small, long-traveled light. Yet once we have heard this story, it is difficult to look up without wondering how many of those points are already gone. How many are only memories still in motion? Beneath the silence, the thought settles gently. Some lights travel longer than memory itself. Long after names have vanished from stone. Long after voices have thinned into dust. Long after empires have crumbled into anonymous sand. They go on, indifferent to being remembered, yet generous to those who happen to be watching when they finally arrive. And somewhere, in the great dark ocean above, there are other stars already on their way to us. Messages from fires that may no longer burn, destined to touch lives not yet born, carrying stories too vast for any single era to claim. The star that refused to die has finished its part in the sky's long, slow sentence. But its echo lingers, here in these legends, in our quiet awe, and in the simple, humbling realization that we, too, may be someone else's ghost light one day. It is said that in certain deserts, the sky comes so close to the earth that for a single breath in the life of the world, they almost touch. In forgotten corners of the kingdom, far beyond the last cultivated field and the final watchtower, there lies a scatter of low ruins, worn down almost to the level of the sand. From a distance, they look like nothing more than broken teeth of stone jutting out of the earth, remnants of walls whose names have long departed. But when the sun sinks and the air cools, and the first hint of dusk begins to soften the horizon, something else appears. Under the first wash of evening, the stones begin to glimmer, not brightly, not in a way that would draw the attention of hurried travelers. Their surfaces remain grey and cracked, their edges softened by wind and time. Yet if you come close, if you kneel, and let the last light of the day slip sideways across the stone, you will see it. Tiny flecks of gold, embedded as though pressed into the rock by a patient, invisible hand. In remote ruins, fragments of stone bear these golden flecks scattered in delicate patterns, like letters pressed by a giant hand, like constellations rearranged onto earth. Whispers tell us that long ago, in a night now wrapped in legend, the sky itself bent low here. The tale says that during one extraordinary night, streaks of gold fell from the heavens, not as spears of fire, not as thunderbolts, but as soft, shimmering trails, like the handwriting of a god who had grown tired of ink and clay and chose instead to write directly on the world. People woke to a strange light on the horizon, a quiet glow that did not belong to dawn or flame. They followed it across the sleeping desert to find these stones, plain, unadorned, humble, now brushed with a dust that still glimmered faintly in the air, settling into cracks and crevices, leaving behind a thin skin of luminous script. Some believe the stars themselves had let go of their brightness for a moment, reaching out to touch the earth in a gesture of unspoken meaning. As we step into the ruins now, the sky above us deepens into a soft blue-violet bowl. The first stars appear, shy and patient. The sand cooled beneath our feet, exhaling the day's heat in a long, slow sigh. Around us, the stones rise in low, broken shapes. Fragments of walls, toppled columns, the suggestion of a courtyard that once held voice and footsteps, and the spill of torchlight. Most of the carvings that would have told us whose city this once was have been carried away by dust and time. Names have crumbled. Faces have faded. But the gold remains. We draw nearer to one of the larger blocks, half buried and tilted like a book left open and then forgotten. With careful fingers, we brush away a layer of fine sand. Underneath, the stone is pitted and rough, and between the pits, scattered like grains of sunlight, are those flecks. Embedded in its surface, they catch the last of the twilight, glowing not harshly, but with a soft inner warmth, as if remembering a light that is no longer visible in the sky. We run our fingers across the glittering traces. They are not smooth. They rise faintly beneath the fingertips, just enough to feel like raised writing on a page. Lines of gold link some flecks into curves, others into clusters, others still into vague spirals that hint at intention but refuse to resolve into anything we can easily read. It is as though nature spoke in a language brighter than words, then left before anyone could answer. Pharaohs, the old stories say, treated this site as sacred. When word of the golden stones reached the capital, carried by shepherds and wanderers and those who favored the empty expanses more than the crowded courts, the news must have sounded like myth. A place where the sky had written its will. A desert shrine inked not by human hands but by falling light. At first, skeptics scoffed. Stones glint at sunset in many places, they would have said. Sand sometimes holds onto mica or crystal that mimics gold. But the tale persisted, carried in the mouths of those who had seen the ruins firsthand. Eventually, a caravan was sent. Priests and scribes traveled under the royal standard, their scrolls carefully packed, their instruments strapped to the backs of patient animals. They journeyed by day along the river and by night under unfamiliar stars, then turned away from water into the dry, echoing silence of the dunes. When they arrived, the sight changed them. Scrolls tell us that they fell to their knees, not in fear, but in a kind of stunned humility. These were men and women who had spent their lives inscribing symbols onto walls and tablets with chisels and ink, believing that language flowed from human hands upward to the gods. Here it appeared to have flowed the other way. In their accounts, they do not attempt to define the patterns in the gold. They simply say, "We found letters we did not know how to read." And the stones bore a shining that did not belong to them. From that time on, the ruins became a pilgrimage site, not for the ordinary faithful, but for those charged with reading the will of the heavens. Star readers, dream interpreters, scholars of omen and season. They came not to leave offerings of abundance or victory, but to sit quietly among the fractured walls and let the golden flecks catch the changing light as the night unfolded. By torchlight, the gold looked one way, by full moon, another. On the darkest nights, when clouds smothered the sky, they say the stones themselves glowed faintly, as though retaining a memory of something that had passed over them and, in passing, agreed to stay a little while. Beneath the silence, the sight hums with anticipation. We wander now through the tumbled layout of what once was. A column stump here, a collapsed doorway there. Time has rearranged everything, and yet the gold persists in its scattered script. threading through this collapsed geometry like veins of frozen sunlight. We pause beside a broken lintel engraved with faint signs. Here, someone long ago tried to answer the sky's writing with their own. The human letters wrap around the golden flecks, never covering them, only framing them as if in reverent brackets. The inscription reads roughly, "We do not know your sentence, but we know its beauty." In another fragment, we find a precaution, a gentle warning: do not carve over what was given. Leave the shining as it fell. So they did. The gold was never scraped away, never mined, never melted into ornaments. Pharaohs could have ordered the stones transported, their embedded flecks transformed into jewelry for crowns or amulets for favored priests. They did not. They believed this place itself was the treasure, a page of earth upon which the sky had chosen for one brief night to write. Some believe the golden streaks were the tailings of a meteor, a spray of celestial metal flung loose as the stone from space scorched through the atmosphere. Some say they were dust shaken from the robe of a passing comet. Others prefer quieter explanations: an illusion of sunset, a trick of mineral and mind. But the priests were less interested in cause than in companionship. For them, this was not about proof. It was about presence. They would describe, in soft ink and careful strokes, how the golden marks changed with the hours. At dusk, they resembled rivers seen from far above, branching and rejoining. At midnight, they looked like constellations shattered and rearranged upon stone. Near dawn, as the first pale light washed across the ruins, the gold faded almost to nothing, leaving behind the impression of letters that had just finished saying what they needed to say. Beneath the silence, we can almost hear the scratching of styluses on papyrus, the murmured debates of scribes who wondered if the patterns had traced a warning. Changes in the river's rhythm, shifts in dynasties, secrets about the turning of the stars themselves. They sat with their scrolls unfurled, tracing lines across the stone with trembling fingers, trying to match heaven's handwriting to their own. They never managed to translate it. Over time, the interpretations dulled. Different schools argued for different readings. One saw omens of renewal, another saw caution, another saw only the reflection of their own deepest hopes. The gold did not change in response. It lay there, indifferent and radiant, content to exist without being decoded. Perhaps it was never meant to be read. Perhaps this place was not a message to be mastered, but a reminder. A reminder that the sky has voices other than thunder, that sometimes nature speaks not by tearing mountains open, but by touching stone lightly and leaving behind a shimmer that resists explanation. We sit on a fallen block, letting the night settle around us. The moon climbs higher. Marked by the moon, the ruins glow more strongly now. The golden flecks catch her light and send it back in gentle fragments, as if the stones are quietly applauding her passage across the heavens. Our fingers trace the flecks again. In the cool of night, they feel neither warm nor cold. Just there, as steady as the desert itself. Dust has gathered in their gaps, softening the edges of the patterns. Yet from certain angles, in certain breaths of time, they still look startlingly new, as though the stardust fell only yesterday. Where memory fades, the stones still hold this one shining moment. We close our eyes and imagine that night as the earliest witnesses must have seen it. A sky streaked with sudden gold, a series of luminous trails descending in silence. No thunder, no roar, just the sight of the heavens leaning down to touch the earth and leaving behind their fingerprints. Perhaps those watching did not feel fear at all. Perhaps they felt recognized, as if the universe for once had paused its vast turning to write a short note on the ground where they stood, acknowledging them in a language too bright and too brief to be preserved in any scroll but this one, spelled out in flecks of light. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. The golden script waits. It has been waiting longer than any human life. It waits through storms of sand, through ages of neglect, through the curious eyes of scholars and the indifferent passage of those who do not see. It waits through our own fleeting visit, patient, unhurried. As the night deepens, the wind rises just enough to stir a thin veil of dust. It moves across the stones like a soft brushstroke, briefly hiding the gold, then revealing it again in new patterns. For a moment, everything seems to shimmer. Ruins, sand, air, as if the sky is tracing its letters for us once more. Then the wind passes. The shimmer settles. We rise, brushing grains from our hands, and look back one last time at the golden flecks embedded in the stone. They are small, almost insignificant to eyes trained to look for larger wonders. And yet they pull at the heart with a gentle insistence. The sight hums with anticipation, as if the script is still mid-sentence, waiting for someone patient enough, not clever, not powerful, simply patient, to sit with it long enough that the need to understand gives way to the simple joy of being in its presence. Perhaps it was never meant to be found by many. Perhaps it was meant for those who are willing to accept that some messages are not there to be solved, but to soften us, to remind us that we live in a world where once the sky wrote in gold, and where, even now, the stones remember. As we turn away and walk back into the wider desert, the ruins remain behind us, lit by moon and stars and their own quiet gleam. The gold rests in the stone, and the stone rests in the sand, and the sand rests beneath a sky that, at any moment, might decide to speak again. Until then, the night holds its secret, not tightly, not jealously, but like a story waiting for someone to fall asleep listening, so it can go on being told in dreams. It is said that every kingdom has a place where its noise runs out, where the sound of markets and chariots and shouted names dissolves into something so quiet that the earth finally remembers how to hear itself. In forgotten maps of the desert, drawn by patient hands and folded into the corners of temple archives, there is a slender, hesitant line that leads to such a place. They called it simply the canyon that breathes. Far from the river's green ribbon, where the horizon circles without interruption and the sun walks the same vast path each day, the desert grows empty in a way that feels almost intentional. Dunes smooth themselves into long, unbroken curves. The wind, which elsewhere sculpts and scolds, grows gentler, as though it, too, is growing tired. It is here, in the desert's farthest silence, that the canyon lies. At first, it is nothing more than a shadow, a dark seam in the sand, a fault line where the land dips and the dunes refuse to follow. From a distance, it looks like a crack in a pot fired too quickly. As we draw nearer, moonlight pools along its edges, outlining two walls of pale stone rising close together, like hands almost meeting in prayer. A narrow passage opens between them, a corridor carved not by chisels, but by something more patient: time, wind, and the slow insistence of change. We stand at the mouth of this canyon. Behind us, the desert is a sheet of silver under the full, watchful moon. Ahead, the darkness between the stone walls feels denser, warmer, as if holding onto secrets the open world cannot bear. There is wind here, but it never raises its voice. It does not howl or whistle. Instead, it exhales in soft, rhythmic pulses, like a sleeping giant beneath the earth. Each breath moves through the canyon with the same measured cadence, gently brushing the sand, touching the stone, stirring the thin fabric that separates one realm from another. In ancient texts, written in ink that has faded to the color of smoke, this canyon is described as a place where pharaohs came to hear messages from the world beyond. Not in thunder or vision or blazing omen, but in breath. The breath that flows between life and eternity. The quiet in between, where names and titles and the weight of crowns fall away, and only the slow rise and fall of existence remains. We step inside. The walls rise close around us, almost close enough to touch with outstretched arms. Their surfaces are pale and smooth in places, rough and striated in others, as if the canyon remembers different ages of the earth, layered one over another. Moonlight does not flood this passage. It seeps in thin, gentle threads from above, where the sky has been narrowed to a ragged, luminous ribbon. Along the floor, the light forms pools and rivulets, tracing a path forward like spilled silver ink. Our footsteps are muffled. Sand has drifted into the canyon, but only in thin sweeps, as though the wind cannot quite decide whether to bring the desert in or keep it out. The air feels thick, not with heat, but with presence. Something has lived in this silence for a long time. Something older than any name. It is said that pharaohs did not come here with retinues. They came at night, cloaked, accompanied perhaps only by a single priest who knew how to walk without disturbing the canyon's breath. At the entrance, even the most powerful ruler of the land would pause, leaving behind the clatter of cymbals and entering as a listener, not a speaker. We walk slowly through the moonlit passage, as they once did. Along the walls, our eyes begin to pick out faint carvings. Not the bold reliefs of gods and victories found in city temples, but symbols carved so lightly they resemble starlight settling on stone. Tiny spirals, small feathers, pairs of open eyes, lines that begin with certainty and then taper off, as if the carver changed their mind halfway through, deciding silence would say the rest better. Some of the carvings trail downward, following vertical fissures, as though engraving the path breath itself has taken over the centuries. If we brush our fingers along the walls, we can feel them, not as deep cuts, but as slight changes in texture, like the first wrinkles at the corner of a long watching eye. Whispers tell us that each symbol marks a listening. On nights when the pharaoh came, he did not ask the canyon for commands. He did not demand prophecies. He came with questions folded inside his chest, but left them there, unspoken. He would stand or sit upon the sand, close his eyes, and allow the canyon's slow exhale to move through him. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Soon, his own breathing would fall into step with that deeper rhythm. It is said that in those hours, the ruler of a nation could feel, perhaps for the first time, that he was not steering the world alone, that beneath his decisions and laws and wars and grain tallies, there was a larger pulse at work, a current that carried all eras, all empires, all lives along a common stream. We move deeper, and the sound of the wind's breathing becomes more distinct. It slips into the canyon in soft waves. There is a texture to each gust, warm dust, a trace of old stone, and something else, an almost oceanic faintness, as if the air remembers being water, remembers being cloud, remembers being part of every breath taken by every creature that ever lived. Here, the idea of separation thins. The pharaohs came, the texts say, when they had reached a point where no council could untangle the knots before them, when advisors argued endlessly and omens contradicted one another, when their own minds felt as restless and scattered as wind over open dunes. In those moments, they sought not more voices, but fewer. The canyon was not a place of answers. It was a place of unclenching, of loosening the grip on outcomes, of listening for the subtle reminder that the burdens they carried had once belonged to others and would one day belong to others again. Between two worlds, one inscription reads in the old language, there is a breath that belongs to neither and touches both. We stop when the canyon narrows into its most slender point. Here, the sky is a mere slash overhead, and the moon, marked by its own scars and stories, pours her light through that cut with exquisite intimacy. The sand at our feet is striated, bands of pale, darker pale again, as though each exhale of the canyon has laid down a layer, recording the passage of nights in a secret stratigraphy. On the wall beside us, there is a slightly larger symbol. It shows a figure without crown or sash, arms lowered, palms open, standing between two vertical lines. Above the figure, a small spiral. Beneath it, a simple feather. The accompanying text, carved so delicately we must lean close to see, says, "He came with the weight of two worlds and left with the weight of one." Perhaps that is all the canyon offered. Not visions of the future, not detailed plans, but a tuning of the heart, aligning the rhythm of an individual life with the deeper rhythm of everything else. Beneath the silence, this alignment is still possible. We rest our backs against the stone and close our eyes for a moment. The canyon breathes, we breathe, the night breathes. There is no clear boundary between them, not here. The air that fills our lungs has brushed these walls, has slid along the grains of sand, has perhaps once risen from the river or from another distant sea. Before that, it may have lived in the lungs of creatures whose bones are now dust beneath distant hills. The breath between two worlds, as is not just some mysterious force between life and death. It is also this shared movement, the ceaseless exchange of air between beings and eras, the quiet, unseen bond that binds us to those who came before and those still to come. Some believe that on certain nights, the canyon's exhale carries faint whispers from the dead. Not distinct words, not recognizable voices, but a feeling. Like the warmth left on a cushion when someone has just risen from it, or the faint scent of smoke that lingers long after the fire has burned down. Others say that the canyon is simply the earth itself breathing, and that what pharaohs heard here was not the council of spirits, but the counsel of a world reminding them that nothing is ever entirely gone. Where memory fades, breath remains. We begin to walk again, slowly, pacing our steps to the canyon's rhythm. Symbols continue to appear, small marks only visible when the moonlight strikes them sideways. A pair of hands open, a closed eye beside an open one. A line that breaks, then resumes, shifted slightly, as if acknowledging that even the simplest things are never exactly the same twice. In places, the carvings stop entirely, and only the natural patterns of stone and shadow continue the story. It feels right, somehow, that the canyon's own grain should speak more loudly than anything any human tool could add. Somewhere near the middle of the passage, a flat stone rests on the ground, almost like a bench. It is not shaped by tools. It seems to have fallen into place by coincidence, or by a quieter kind of intention. The surface bears no carvings, only a slight hollow where countless bodies may once have sat, knees drawn up, heads tilted back, listening. We sit there now, letting our thoughts thicken and then thin, rising and falling like the air. Time drifts. How long did the pharaohs sit like this? An hour? 3? Long enough for their anxieties to tire themselves out, for their minds to stop rehearsing every possible outcome and simply surrender to the fact that the river would rise or not. The enemy would attack or not. The harvest would prosper or fail. In that surrender, perhaps, came a different kind of clarity. Not the certainty of knowing what would happen, but the calm of knowing that when it did, they would meet it from a steadier place. A place connected to something more than their own fear. The canyon breathes again. A warm gust moves through, brushing our skin. It smells faintly of sand, stone, and something we can only call old sunlight. Light long ago absorbed into the rock, and now returning as gentle heat. For a fleeting moment, we feel as though we are being touched by a hand that is not entirely here, but not entirely gone either. Perhaps this place is less a message than an invitation to remember that every era leaves behind whispers in stone, in stories, in the invisible habits of air. And some of those whispers do not speak to crowds or dynasties. They choose their listeners with care, waiting for those whose steps slow at the canyon's mouth, whose hearts have grown quiet enough to hear the gap between their own breaths. Eventually, the walls begin to widen. The sky above opens from thin ribbon to broader strip, then finally to a full bowl of stars. The canyon's breath softens, its pulses less pronounced. The desert wind resumes its more familiar voice, stirring sand into gentle swirls at our feet. We emerge from the passage. Behind us, the canyon stands as it has stood for so long, a narrow scar in the land, filled with a quiet that feels older than language. Ahead, the desert stretches under the night, dunes rolling away under a sky marked by the moon and stitched with constellations that have watched countless generations come and go. We look back one last time. No sign marks the place. No temple surrounds it. No obelisk points toward it. To most, it is nothing, a dark crease in a sleeping landscape. But we know now that within that crease, the world breathes in a way that those who built pyramids and carved laws into stone once trusted more than any spoken advice. Perhaps it was never meant to be found by many. Perhaps the canyon of breath exists only for those who have reached the edge of their own noise and are willing, finally, to step into a narrow passage where the only counsel given is the soft, rhythmic pulse of earth and sky sharing the same air. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some breaths only reveal their depth when we stop trying to fill the silence with our own. As we turn toward the open desert, the wind brushes our face again. Less a gust now, more a gentle exhale. It carries with it no clear words, no distinct admonitions. only a feeling that we have been included, for a moment, in a conversation that has been going on since before anyone thought to write their questions down. The breath between two worlds moves on. It passes through the canyon, through us, through the sand, and back into the vastness above, where stars flicker, fade, and are born again. And somewhere, far behind us, the narrow passage waits in its soft darkness, ready to welcome the next weary traveler, who comes seeking not answers, but the comfort of being reminded that they are not alone in their breathing.